I was lying in a hospital bed with a jagged scar running down the center of my chest. My heart had literally been stopped and restarted by a team of surgeons just 3 days ago. All I wanted was a ride home. Just a simple ride. I texted my son Damon. I texted my daughter-in-law Courtney. I thought surely after a triple bypass surgery, they would care enough to drive 20 minutes to pick me up. The answer I got shattered me more than the scalpel ever could. "Call a taxi, Dad, the game is on." That was what my son wrote. And then came the second text, the one that made me rip the IV out of my own arm. "Stay in the hospital for another month. It is so nice without you here." They thought I was a helpless old man living on a small pension. They didn't know I was Augustus Freeman, the man who built the largest logistics empire in Chicago. And they certainly didn't know that by the end of the night, they would be begging me to pick up the phone while I gave their entire inheritance to a waitress. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives in 24 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect goes both ways. My name is Gus, and I am 70 years old. For 40 years, I was the ghost of the Chicago highways. I started with one rusted truck and built a fleet of 500. I moved steel, I moved grain, and I moved millions of dollars of freight. But 5 years ago, I sold it all. I walked away with $50 million in the bank. But I made a choice. A dangerous choice. I decided to hide it. I wanted my son Damon to learn the value of a dollar. I wanted him to build his own life the way I built mine. So I pretended to be a pensioner. I pretended to live check to check. I moved into the in-law suite of the house I bought for him, and I let him think he was taking care of me. I thought I was teaching him humility. Instead, I was funding a monster. The room at Chicago General was cold. It smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. I hated it. The monitor next to my bed beeped with a steady rhythmic pulse. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound in the room. No flowers on the nightstand, no get-well-soon cards. Just me and the machines. Dr. Evans walked in with a clipboard. He was a young man too young to be cutting people open, in my opinion, but he had steady hands. "Good news, Mr. Freeman," he said, smiling. "Your recovery is remarkable for a man of your age. Your vitals are stable. The drainage tubes are out. If you have someone to monitor you at home, we can discharge you this afternoon." Home. The word felt warm in my chest, warmer than the heating pad they had given me. I wanted my own bed. I wanted to sit in my old armchair and watch the snow fall. I wanted to see my family. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice raspy from the intubation tube. "My son. He will come. He is a good boy." Dr. Evans nodded. "Great. Call them. Tell them to bring a warm coat. It is 5 degrees below zero out there." He left the room. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My hand was shaking. It wasn't fear. It was the aftershock of the surgery. My chest felt like it had been kicked by a mule. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. I unlocked the screen. I opened the group chat. It was named Family Love. Courtney had named it that 3 years ago when I paid the down payment on the house. Back then she was sweet. Back then she called me Dad. I typed slowly, my thumb hovering over each letter. "I can come home. The doctor said I am ready. Can one of you pick me up? I am still in a lot of pain and I cannot walk far." I hit send. I watched the screen. Read by Damon. Read by Courtney. I waited. The 3 little dots appeared, showing that someone was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. My heart beat faster. I imagined them rushing to the car. I imagined Damon grabbing my heavy wool coat from the closet. I imagined Courtney making a pot of soup. Then the phone buzzed. "Damon. Dad, seriously. The Bears game just started. It is the 4th quarter. Just call an Uber. It is like $20. I stared at the message. The Bears game. My heart surgery versus a football game. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. I typed back. "Son, I just had open heart surgery. I cannot sit in a taxi. I need help getting into the house. Please." I waited again. Maybe he was joking. Damon had a bad sense of humor sometimes. Then a message from Courtney popped up. Courtney. "Oh my God, Gus. We just deep cleaned the house. If you come back now, you are just going to make a mess with your medicines and your bandages. Honestly, the house feels so much bigger without you shuffling around." I blinked. I read it again. And then the kicker. She sent another message. "Courtney, why don't you tell the doctor you feel sick? Stay in the hospital for another month. It is so nice without you here. Enjoy the vacation." And she added a laughing emoji, a yellow face with tears of joy streaming down its cheeks. I dropped the phone on the sheets. "It is so nice without you here." The words echoed in my head louder than the heart monitor. For 3 years I had paid their mortgage anonymously through a shell company, so they thought they had a low interest rate. I paid for the groceries. I paid for Courtney's online business courses that she never finished. I paid for Damon's car insurance. And this was my return on investment. I looked out the window. The sky over Chicago was a bruised purple. The wind was howling against the glass. I closed my eyes. A single tear leaked out. It felt hot on my cheek. I wasn't crying because my chest hurt. I was crying because I realized I had failed. I had raised a son who would leave his father to freeze on a curb for a football game, and I had welcomed a woman into my home who viewed my existence as an inconvenience to her interior design. The pain in my chest changed. It wasn't the sharp sting of the incision anymore. It was a heavy, dull ache of finality. "I am not a burden," I whispered to the empty room. "I am Augustus Freeman." I sat up. The world spun. Black spots danced in front of my eyes. The pain in my sternum screamed at me to lie back down. "No," I said through gritted teeth. I grabbed the railing of the bed. I pulled myself up. My legs were weak, shaking like newborn colts. I stood there, swaying in my hospital gown, feeling the cold air hit my skin. I looked at the IV line still taped to the back of my hand. The nurse was supposed to take it out. I didn't call the nurse. I reached over with my other hand. I gritted my teeth. I pulled. A sharp pinch. A trickle of dark blood welled up on my skin. I grabbed a tissue from the box and pressed it down hard. I walked to the small closet in the corner of the room. My clothes were there. My old gray sweatpants. My flannel shirt. My worn-out sneakers. They looked like the clothes of a poor old man. That was the disguise I had chosen. I dressed slowly. Every button was a battle. Every movement sent a shockwave through my ribcage. But I didn't stop. I put on my coat. It was thin. It wasn't enough for the Chicago winter. I picked up my phone one last time. I looked at the family love group chat. Damon had sent a photo of the TV screen showing a touchdown. Courtney had hearted it. They were celebrating. They were happy. They thought the old man was tucked away in a hospital bed, safe and out of sight. I didn't reply. I didn't get angry. A strange, cold calm washed over me. It was the same calm I used to feel before I walked into a boardroom to buy out a competitor. It was the calm of a man who knows he holds all the aces. I put the phone in my pocket. I walked to the door. I didn't look back at the bed. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The nurse station was busy. Phones were ringing. Maya, the head nurse, looked up and saw me. Her eyes went wide. "Mr. Freeman," she said, dropping her pen. "What are you doing? You can't leave yet. We haven't processed your papers. Where is your family?" I looked at her. She was a kind woman. She had held my hand when I woke up from anesthesia. She had treated me with more dignity in 3 days than my daughter-in-law had in 3 years. "My family is waiting outside, Maya," I lied. My voice was steady. "They are in the car." "But you need a wheelchair," she said, coming around the desk. "It is policy. You can't walk to the exit." "I don't need a wheelchair," I said. "I need to walk. I need to feel the ground under my feet." She looked at me. She saw something in my eyes. Maybe she saw the pain. Maybe she saw the determination. She stopped. "Are you sure you are okay, Gus?" she asked softly. I smiled. It was a weak smile, but it was real. "I am better than I have been in years," I said. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, I took a deep breath. "Okay, Damon. Okay, Courtney. You want me to stay away. You want it to be nice without me. Be careful what you wish for." The elevator descended, going down, just like their future. I stepped out into the lobby. The automatic doors slid open, and the Chicago winter hit me like a physical blow. The wind bit through my thin coat. The snow swirled around my ankles. I stood on the sidewalk. I looked at the line of cars picking up patients. Families hugging, sons helping fathers, wives helping husbands. I was alone. I reached into my pocket and touched my wallet. Inside was a black American Express card that I hadn't used in 5 years. I raised my hand and hailed a yellow cab. "Where to?" the driver asked as I climbed in, groaning from the pain. I didn't give him my home address. I didn't give him Damon's address. "Take me to the uncompromising law offices of Bernie Steinberg," I said, "and step on it." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You look like you just escaped the morgue, pal," he said. I looked out the window at the gray city. "I did," I whispered. "And now I am going to bury some people. Drive." Signing the discharge papers felt harder than signing the contract for my first fleet of trucks back in '82. My hand was trembling, not from age, but from the sheer effort of keeping my composure. The pen felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Every stroke of the ink on the paper was a lie. I was signing a document that stated I had a safe transport plan and a supportive home environment to return to. I had neither. Maya, the head nurse, stood over me with her arms crossed. Her face was pinched with worry. She had been a nurse for 20 years, and she had that sixth sense that all good nurses have. She knew when a patient was lying. She looked at the empty chair beside my bed, where a family member should have been sitting. She looked at my small plastic bag of personal belongings, which I was clutching like it was a bag of gold. "Mr. Freeman," she said, her voice soft but firm, "where is your family? You just had a triple bypass 3 days ago. You cannot drive. You cannot even lift that bag. I cannot let you walk out of these doors alone. It is against protocol, and quite frankly, it is against my conscience." I finished signing the last page. I put the pen down and forced a smile onto my face. It felt like a mask made of cracked clay. "They are waiting at the curb, Maya," I lied. My voice sounded thin and raspy. "My son Damon, he is in the black SUV right outside the main entrance. He couldn't find parking, so he is circling the block. You know how Chicago parking is." Maya didn't look convinced. She looked at her clipboard, then back at me. "I can call him for you," she offered, reaching for the phone. "I can tell him to pull up to the wheelchair ramp." "No," I said too quickly. I pulled my hand away. "No need to bother him. He is on a conference call. Big business deal. I don't want to interrupt. I can walk." I stood up. The room tilted. The floor seemed to rush up to meet me, then sway back down. The pain in my chest was a living thing, a hot, jagged line of fire running down my sternum. I gritted my teeth and locked my knees. I am Augustus Freeman. I have walked through blizzards to deliver cargo. I have walked through picket lines. I can walk to a damn door. I grabbed my bag. Maya stepped forward to help, but I waved her off. "I am fine," I said. "Thank you for everything, Maya. You are an angel." I walked past her. I kept my back straight, even though every step sent a shockwave through my ribcage. I walked down the long, sterile hallway. I passed other rooms where I saw families gathered around beds. I saw a daughter feeding her elderly father soup. I saw a wife holding her husband's hand as he slept. I looked away. I couldn't bear to watch it. It was like looking at a feast when you are starving to death. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into hell. The reflection in the polished metal doors stared back at me. I looked old. My skin was gray. My eyes were sunken. I looked like exactly what Courtney had called me. A burden. A ghost. When the automatic doors slid open, the Chicago winter hit me like a physical punch to the gut. They call it the hawk, the wind that blows off Lake Michigan. That afternoon, the hawk was out for blood. The air was 5 degrees below zero, and the wind chill made it feel like 20 below. It cut right through my thin wool coat. It laughed at my scarf. It sought out the fresh incision on my chest and dug its icy claws in deep. I gasped. The cold air burned my lungs. I should have turned back. I should have gone to the lobby and called a car service. I had the money. I had the black card in my wallet. But I didn't. I stood there on the concrete, shivering uncontrollably. I wanted to punish myself. That is the truth. I stood in the freezing cold because I felt I deserved it. I had created this situation. I had raised Damon to be soft. I had given him everything I never had, and in doing so, I had taken away the one thing he needed: character. I had shielded him from the cold his whole life, so now I had to stand in it alone. I looked at the line of cars. A black SUV pulled up. My heart leaped for a second. Damon? No. It was for the woman standing next to me. A young man jumped out and wrapped a blanket around his mother's shoulders, helping her into the heated seat. "Here, Mom, let me get that," he said. I watched them drive away. The taillights blurred as my eyes filled with tears. The wind froze them to my cheeks instantly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers were numb. I told myself I was checking to see if Damon had texted back. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe the game was over. Maybe his conscience had woken up. I opened the phone. No texts. No missed calls. My thumb drifted to the Instagram icon. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for pain. Maybe I needed to see the knife before I could pull it out. Courtney had posted a new story 5 minutes ago. I tapped the circle around her smiling face. The video played. The sound was loud. Laughter. Clinking glass. Jazz music playing in the background. It was my living room. The living room I had paid for. The fireplace was roaring. My fireplace. The camera panned around the room. It was spotless. They had indeed cleaned, but they hadn't cleaned for me. They had cleaned to erase me. Courtney's face filled the screen. She was holding a glass of vintage Cabernet. I recognized the bottle. It was a Chateau Margaux I had been saving for my 75th birthday. It cost $800. She took a sip and giggled. "Cheers to a quiet house," she said to the camera. Then she flipped the camera to show Damon, my son. He was sprawled on my leather recliner, the one I sat in to read the newspaper every morning. He had his feet up on the coffee table. He was eating a steak. "Damon, say hi to the fans," Courtney said. Damon waved a forkful of meat at the camera. "Living the dream, babe," he mumbled, his mouth full. Finally, some peace and quiet. Then came the caption, white text over the video of my empty house. "Clean house, clear mind. So nice when the ghost is gone for a month. Endless joy. Ghost." She called me a ghost. Not Dad, not Gus. A ghost. Something dead. Something that haunts you. Something you are afraid of and want to banish. I stood there on the sidewalk and I felt something inside me snap. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig breaking under a heavy boot. The cold didn't bother me anymore. The pain in my chest faded into the background. I looked at the phone. I looked at my son eating my steak and drinking my wine in the house I bought, celebrating the fact that I was shivering in a hospital parking lot. They didn't just leave me here. They were throwing a party on my grave before I was even in it. I closed the Instagram app. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a cold, dark resolve settling over me. It was heavier than the snow and harder than the ice. "A ghost," I whispered. "You want a ghost, Courtney? You want a ghost, Damon? Fine, I will be a ghost. But I won't be the kind that just rattles chains in the attic. I will be the kind that burns the house down." I looked down the street. A line of Ubers and Lyfts were gliding by, sleek and impersonal. I didn't want them. I saw a beat-up yellow taxicab idling near the end of the rank. The driver was an old man, smoking a cigarette out the window, looking as tired as I felt. I walked over to him. My step was different now. I wasn't shuffling. I was marching. I pulled the back door open and slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. It smelled of stale tobacco and pine air freshener. It smelled like the trucks I used to drive in the 70s. It smelled like work. It smelled like reality. "Where to Mac?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. He saw the hospital bracelet still on my wrist. He saw the pale skin and the shaking hands. He probably thought I was going home to die. I looked him in the eye. "Take me to the Loop," I said. "The law offices of Bernie Steinberg." The driver raised an eyebrow. "That is a fancy address for a guy in sweatpants," he said. "You got the fare?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a roll of $100 bills. I peeled one off and tossed it onto the front seat. "Drive," I said. The driver's eyes widened. He stubbed out his cigarette and threw the car into gear. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving the hospital behind. I didn't look back. I didn't look at the window of the room where I had almost died. I looked forward, toward the city skyline, toward the office where my will was stored in a safe. The Augustus Freeman who entered that hospital 3 days ago was a father who wanted to be loved. The Augustus Freeman who left it was a businessman who was about to close a failing division. My heart was beating steady and strong. The surgeons had fixed the blockage in my arteries. Now I was going to fix the blockage in my life. "Turn up the heat," I told the driver. "I have a lot of work to do, and I need to thaw out." We merged onto the highway, the city lights blurring past us. I took one last look at my phone at the Family Love group chat. I pressed the button. Leave group. Delete conversation. Block contact. Block contact. Goodbye, Damon. Goodbye, Courtney. The ghost is coming for you. The elevator doors to the 40th floor of the Steinberg and Associates building slid open with a soft ping. I stepped out onto the plush carpet that was thicker than the mattress I had slept on for the last 3 nights. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a headset that cost more than my shoes, looked up. Her smile faltered instantly. She didn't see Augustus Freeman, the logistics tycoon. She saw a 70-year-old black man in gray sweatpants and a hospital bracelet, shivering in a thin coat. She saw a vagrant who had wandered past security. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her hand hovering over the panic button under her desk. I didn't answer her. I didn't have the energy to explain that I paid the lease on this entire floor. I just kept walking. My chest was a furnace of pain, but my legs kept moving. I pushed past the heavy oak doors of the corner office. Bernie Steinberg was sitting behind his desk, dictating something into a recorder. He looked up, annoyed at the intrusion. Then his jaw dropped. Bernie has been my lawyer and my friend for 30 years. We fought lawsuits together. We fought unions together. He was the only man in Chicago who knew exactly how much money was sitting in the offshore accounts of Freeman Holdings. Gus Bernie stammered, standing up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the window. "Good God, Gus, what are you doing here? You were supposed to be in post-op. You look like death warmed over." He rushed around the desk, grabbing my arm before I could collapse. He guided me to the leather client chair. It was the same chair I sat in 5 years ago when I signed the papers to sell my company. I sat down. I let out a breath that rattled in my lungs. "I need water, Bernie," I rasped, "and I need the red file." Bernie poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe, his hands shaking slightly. He handed it to me. "Gus, talk to me," he said. "Did something go wrong with the surgery? Did you escape? Where is Damon? Why isn't he here helping you?" I took a sip of the water. It was cold and clean. It tasted like wealth. It tasted like the life I had left behind to teach my son a lesson. A lesson, I thought bitterly. What a joke. 5 years ago, I sat right here and told Bernie my plan. I had just sold Freeman Logistics for $50 million. I had 500 trucks on the road. I had a warehouse that covered 3 city blocks. I was the king of the highway. But I looked at my son Damon, and I saw a boy who was getting too comfortable. He was 25 then, and he had never worked a hard day in his life. So I hid the money. I put it all in a blind trust. I told Damon the business went bust. I told him we were living on my pension and Social Security. I moved into the basement of the house I bought for him, and I pretended to be poor. I thought if he had to struggle, he would find his backbone. I thought if he had to take care of me, he would learn compassion. I was a fool. You can't teach a shark to be a vegetarian by starving it. It just learns to eat you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked from where I had gripped it too hard in the taxi. I unlocked it and opened the message thread. "Read this," I said, sliding the phone across the mahogany desk. Bernie picked it up. He adjusted his glasses. I watched his face. He read Damon's text about the football game. He frowned. Then he read Courtney's text about the house being nice without me. Bernie's face turned red. He slammed the phone down. "That little witch," he spat. "And Damon. My God, Gus. They left you at the hospital. In this weather." "They did more than that," I said, my voice gaining strength from the anger. "They are throwing a party right now. They are drinking my Chateau Margaux and celebrating my absence. They called me a ghost, Bernie." I leaned forward, wincing as the stitches in my chest pulled tight. "They want a ghost. I am going to give them a ghost." Bernie looked at me concerned. "Gus, you need to rest. We can deal with this later. Let me call a car to take you to a hotel. You need to sleep." "I don't need sleep," I roared, slamming my hand on the desk. The pain flared hot and white, but I ignored it. "I need justice. Bring up the red file, Bernie, now." Bernie sighed. He walked to his wall safe. He spun the dial. He pulled out a thick red folder. This was the contingency plan, the break glass in case of emergency plan. I never thought I would use it. I hoped I would burn it on my deathbed. He opened the folder and spread the documents out. "This is the deed to the house on Elm Street," Bernie said, pointing to a paper. "The house Damon and Courtney are living in. The house they think they own because you let them play pretend. Sell it," I said. Bernie blinked. "Sell it. Gus, that is their home." "No," I corrected him. "That is my asset. It is in my name. I want it listed on the market immediately. Call the real estate sharks. Tell them I want a cash buyer within 24 hours. Price it to move. I want a for sale sign on that lawn by tomorrow morning. But where will they go? Bernie asked. They can go to hell for all I care, I said, cold as the ice on the window. Or they can go to a hotel, but they are not staying under my roof. I pointed to the next document. The credit cards, I said. The American Express Platinum Supplementaries. I gave them for emergencies. The ones they use to buy designer bags and steak dinners. Cancel them, I ordered. Flag them as stolen, retroactive to this morning. Bernie started typing on his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Done, he said. The cards are dead. What else? The monthly stipend, I said. The $5,000 I transfer to Damon's account every month, under the guise of his consulting salary for the shell company. Cut it. Bernie paused. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Gus, he said softly, if we do this, we are nuking their lives. They have no savings. Courtney has never worked a day in her life. Damon hasn't held a real job in 3 years. If you cut the money and sell the house, they will be on the street. It is the middle of winter. I looked at Bernie. I thought about the text message. Call a taxi, I am watching TV. I thought about the snow on my ankles in the parking lot. I thought about the years I spent driving a truck 16 hours a day, peeing in bottles, and sleeping in rest stops just so I could give Damon a better life. Let them freeze, I said. Bernie stopped typing. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. Gus, listen to me, he said, leaning forward. You just had open-heart surgery 72 hours ago. Your body is in shock. This level of stress, it could kill you. You need to calm down. You need to process this emotion. If you go through with this scorched earth policy, there is no going back. You are going to shock your system. Your heart can't take it. I laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound that hurt my throat. I stood up slowly, clutching the edge of the desk for support. I looked Bernie dead in the eye. Don't worry about my heart, Bernie, I said. My heart died about an hour ago when I read that text message in the hospital bed. The thing beating in my chest right now, it is just a pump. It is just machinery. I am running on batteries and hate now. I picked up the glass of water and finished it. Do it, Bernie. Execute the sale. Cancel the cards. And call the eviction team. I want the locks changed the minute they step out of that house. Bernie nodded slowly. He understood. The father was gone. The businessman was back. Consider it done, Augustus, he said. Good, I said, turning to the door. Now, if you will excuse me, I have to go to dinner. Dinner? Bernie asked, confused. Where are you going? The Ritz? No, I said, buttoning my thin coat over my hospital gown. I am going to the diner on 9th Street, the one near the warehouse district. But that is a dump, Bernie said. Why would you go there? Because I said opening the door. That is where I started. And that is where I need to be to remember who I really am. I need to smell the grease and the coffee. I need to remember what it feels like to be hungry. Because my son is about to find out exactly what hunger tastes like. I walked out of the office. The elevator was waiting. I stepped in, going down. Phase 1 was complete. The money was gone. The house was gone. Now it was time for Phase 2. Facing them. I checked my watch. It was 7 p.m. Damon and Courtney would be getting hungry soon. They would leave the house to find food because Courtney didn't cook. They would probably go to that trendy bar near the old district. Fate was a funny thing. I had a feeling I was going to see them tonight. And when I did, they wouldn't see a father. They would see a stranger with a checkbook and a heart of stone. The taxi driver looked at me in the rearview mirror as we pulled away from the gleaming glass tower of the law firm. He probably wondered why a man who could afford a penthouse lawyer was asking to be dropped off at a grease pit on the south side. The 9th Street Diner wasn't the kind of place you went for the ambiance. It was the kind of place you went when you had $5 in your pocket and 12 hours of driving ahead of you. It was where I ate my first meal in Chicago 40 years ago. It was where I signed the lease on my very first truck. I didn't go there for the nostalgia. I went there because I was starving. My body was screaming for fuel. The hospital food had been tasteless mush, and the adrenaline of the last 2 hours had burned through whatever reserves I had left. I needed soup, I needed heat, and I needed to be somewhere where nobody knew the name Augustus Freeman. "Drop me here," I told the driver as we pulled up to the cracked sidewalk. The neon sign above the door flickered, buzzing like an angry hornet. Half the letters were burnt out, so it just read, DNER. I handed the driver another $100 bill. "Keep the change," I said. He looked at the bill, then at my hospital bracelet. "Good luck, pal," he muttered before speeding off, leaving me in the slush. I stood there for a moment, pulling my thin coat tighter around my throat. The wind was relentless. I pushed open the heavy glass door and the smell hit me instantly. Stale cigarette smoke, even though smoking had been banned for years. Burnt bacon, cheap coffee. It smelled like home. It smelled like the struggle. I shuffled inside, my legs heavy as lead. The place was mostly empty. A few truckers sat at the counter, nursing coffees and staring at their phones. A couple of night shift workers were eating eggs in silence. I kept my head down. I didn't want to make eye contact. I just wanted a corner booth where I could sit and let the heat seep back into my bones. I pulled my wool beanie down low over my forehead and buried my chin in my scarf. To anyone looking, I was just another old man down on his luck. Maybe homeless, maybe crazy, probably both. I was heading toward a booth in the back when I heard it. It was a laugh, a shrill, piercing laugh that sounded like glass breaking. I froze. My hand gripped the back of a vinyl chair so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew that laugh. I had heard that laugh for 3 years at every Thanksgiving dinner, at every Christmas morning, at every birthday party where I handed over a check. Courtney. I turned my head slowly, terrified that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe the medication was making me hallucinate. Maybe I was having a stroke. But it wasn't a hallucination. There, in the far corner booth, under the flickering light of a beer sign, sat my family. Damon and Courtney. They weren't at home. They weren't cleaning. They weren't watching the Bears game on TV. They were here, at a dive bar diner, 5 miles from our house, dressed in their Friday night best. Damon was wearing a leather jacket I had bought him for his birthday last year. It cost $600. Courtney was wearing a fur stole that looked like it belonged on a runway in Paris, not in a diner that smelled of onions. They were drinking cocktails, bright, colorful drinks with little umbrellas. I felt the room spin. The betrayal wasn't just digital anymore, it was physical. It was sitting 20 feet away from me. They had lied about being home. They had lied about cleaning. They were out partying while I was supposedly rotting in a hospital bed. I should have walked out. I should have turned around and left before I did something I would regret. But my feet wouldn't move. A dark, gravitational pull drew me closer. I needed to know. I needed to hear what they were saying. I spotted an empty booth right behind theirs, separated by a high wooden partition. If I was careful, I could sit there and they would never see me. I crept forward, moving silently in my worn-out sneakers. I slid into the booth, keeping my head down. The vinyl seat was cold and cracked. I pressed my back against the wood partition. I was so close, I could smell Courtney's expensive perfume. It was Chanel. I knew because I paid the credit card bill. I signaled the waitress. She was a young girl, tired-looking, with dark circles under her eyes. Her name tag read Lila. "Chicken noodle soup," I whispered, my voice barely a croak. "And hot water, please." She looked at me with pity. She saw the hospital bracelet. She saw the shivering. "Coming right up, honey," she whispered back. As she walked away, I leaned my head back against the wood and listened. "I can't believe we are eating at this dump," Courtney complained, her voice loud and slurred. "Why couldn't we go to the Palm?" "Because, babe," Damon replied, his voice thick with alcohol. "The Palm requires a reservation, and we decided to go out last minute. Besides, nobody knows us here. We can relax." "Relax," Courtney scoffed. "I am sitting on plastic, Damon. My outfit is worth more than this entire building." I closed my eyes. I remembered when I used to bring Damon here for pancakes when he was 5 years old. He loved this place. He used to call it the castle because of the way the jukebox lit up. Now he was too good for it. "Hey, did you check the tracking on my package?" Courtney asked. "Yeah, it arrives tomorrow," Damon said. "But seriously, Court, are you sure about this? $5,000 for a handbag? If Dad sees the statement..." Courtney laughed again. That horrible glass-breaking laugh. "Oh, please," she said. "The old ghost isn't going to see anything. He is probably drooling into a cup of Jell-O right now. I told you I hacked his pension account login. The notifications go to my email now, not his phone. My heart stopped. She hacked my account. I sat there in the booth and felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just the authorized spending. It wasn't just the allowance I gave them. She had broken into my private retirement account, the one I kept separate, the one I pretended was my only lifeline. $5,000. She stole $5,000 from what she thought was a poor old man's life savings to buy a handbag. That is theft, Damon whispered. But he wasn't angry. He sounded impressed. You are crazy. I am smart, Courtney corrected him. Look, he is not going to last much longer, Damon. Did you see him after the surgery? He looked gray. He is weak. Once he kicks the bucket, we get the house, we get the insurance, and we get whatever scraps are left in that pension fund. I am just advancing my inheritance. I gripped the edge of the table. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to reach over that partition and scream at them. I wanted to tell them that the scraps they were talking about were $50 million, and they just lost every single cent of it. But I stayed seated. The waitress arrived with my soup. She placed it down gently. Here you go, sweetie, she whispered. I brought you some extra crackers, on the house. I looked up at her. Her eyes were kind. She didn't know me. She didn't owe me anything. Yet she gave me extra crackers because she thought I was hungry. My own son was sitting 3 feet away, drinking a $20 cocktail paid for with my stolen money, while planning my death. Thank you, I whispered to the waitress. My voice broke. I stared at the soup. It was hot steam rising from the yellow broth. I dipped a spoon in. My hand was shaking so bad the soup spilled back into the bowl. Behind me, Courtney was still talking. I told him to stay in the hospital for another month, she bragged. Can you believe he actually thought we would pick him up? I am in pain. Boo-hoo. Everyone has pain, Gus. Get over it. Yeah, Damon chuckled. I told him the game was on. The Bears aren't even playing tonight. It is a rerun from last season. They laughed together. A conspiratorial bond forged in cruelty. I put the spoon down. I couldn't eat. The nausea rolled over me in waves. A rerun. He left me in the freezing cold for a rerun. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold, hard screen of my phone. I had the power to end this right now. I could text Bernie. I could have the police here in 10 minutes. I could have Courtney arrested for fraud. But no, that was too easy. An arrest was just a legal problem. I wanted a soul problem. I wanted them to feel the shame. I wanted the world to see them exactly as I was seeing them right now. I needed to wait. I needed the perfect moment. Suddenly I heard a commotion. Hey, watch it! Courtney screamed. I heard the sound of glass shattering. I sat up straight. I peered through the small gap between the booth and the wall. The young waitress, Lila, the one who gave me the crackers, was standing by their table. A tray was tipped over in her hands. A glass of water had spilled onto the floor, splashing onto Courtney's fur stole and her shoes. You stupid girl, Courtney yelled, jumping up. Do you know how much these shoes cost? They are Louboutin. You just ruined red bottoms with your dirty tap water. I am so sorry, ma'am, Lila stammered, her face pale. I tripped. The floor is uneven. Let me get a towel. Don't touch me, Courtney shrieked, shoving the girl away. You are clumsy and you are incompetent. I want to speak to your manager. I want you fired. And you are going to pay for these shoes. $2,000. Right now. $2,000, Lila whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't have that kind of money, please. I have a sick mother. I need this job. Damon laughed. He didn't help the girl. He leaned back and lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign. Well, you should have thought about that before you splashed royalty, he sneered. If you don't have cash, maybe you can crawl under the table and lick them clean. That might be worth a discount. The cruelty was breathtaking. It was absolute. I sat there, and I realized that my son wasn't just weak. He was rotten. The fruit hadn't just fallen far from the tree, it had rolled into the sewer. I looked at the weeping waitress. I looked at my son blowing smoke rings. I looked at Courtney, checking her makeup in her phone reflection, ignoring the human being she was destroying. The time for hiding was over, but the time for the reveal, that had to be theatrical. I reached into my pocket. I bypassed my wallet with the few dollar bills I kept for show. I reached into the hidden zippered pocket on the inside of my coat. I pulled out the envelope I had taken from Bernie's safe. It contained $10,000 in cash, emergency money. I took a deep breath. My chest hurt, but my resolve was stronger than steel. I am not a ghost, I thought, standing up. I am the judge, and court is now in session. I pulled my hat down low. I turned up my collar. I picked up my soup bowl and walked toward their table, not as a father, but as a stranger with a verdict to deliver. I held my bowl of soup like a shield as I approached their booth. My steps were slow and deliberate, the shuffle of a man who had been beaten down by life, which wasn't far from the truth. I was only 10 feet away when the disaster happened. It was a small thing, really, a cosmic accident. Lila, the young waitress, looked exhausted. She was balancing a heavy tray of drinks on one arm and trying to clear a dirty plate from the table next to them with the other. As she turned, her elbow bumped against the wooden partition. The tray tipped. It didn't crash. It just tilted enough for a tall glass of ice water to slide off the edge. Gravity took over. The glass fell. It hit the edge of the table and splashed its contents directly onto Courtney's feet. For a second, there was silence. Just the sound of ice cubes skittering across the linoleum floor. Then came the scream. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of entitlement. It was the sound a banshee makes when it doesn't get its way. Courtney jumped up from the booth so fast, she knocked her chair over. "You stupid idiot!" she shrieked. Lila froze. Her face went pale. "I am so sorry, ma'am," she stammered, reaching for a napkin. "Let me dry that for you." "Don't you touch me!" Courtney yelled. She pulled her leg back and then she kicked out. She kicked the waitress in the shin. I watched in horror, but that wasn't the end of it. Courtney reached out and slapped the girl. The sound was sickening, a sharp, wet crack that echoed through the quiet diner. Lila's head snapped to the side. She dropped the tray she was holding. Plates shattered, fries scattered everywhere. Lila brought her hand up to her cheek, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "You ruined my shoes!" Courtney screamed, pointing at her feet. "Look at them! These are Christian Louboutin. They are red bottoms, you incompetent trash. Do you know how much these cost? $2,000. You just poured tap water on $2,000 worth of Italian leather." I stood in the aisle, clutching my soup. I looked at the shoes. I recognized them. I had seen the charge on my credit card statement last month. A charge labeled office supplies that I had let slide because I was trying to be a generous father. Damon didn't stand up. He didn't try to calm his wife down. He just sat there, sipping his cocktail, looking bored. "Babe, calm down," he said lazily. "You are making a scene." "I am not calming down," Courtney raged. She turned to the counter. "Manager! Where is the manager?" A heavy-set man in a grease-stained apron came rushing out of the kitchen. He looked terrified. He saw the broken plates. He saw the screaming woman in the fur stole. He saw the expensive car keys on the table. He made a quick calculation. "What is the problem here, folks?" the manager asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Your employee just assaulted me," Courtney lied. Her voice was shrill. "She threw water on me and ruined my designer heels. I want her fired, right now, and I want compensation." The manager turned to Lila. Lila was shaking, sobbing quietly. "Lila, is this true?" the manager asked. "It was an accident, Mr. Henderson," Lila whispered. "I tripped. I am sorry. I will clean it up." "You are damn right you will clean it up," Courtney spat. "But that is not enough. Those shoes are ruined. Water stains don't come out of suede. You owe me $2,000. $2,000, Lila gasped. Her eyes went wide with panic. "Ma'am, I don't have that money. I make $4 an hour plus tips." "Not my problem," Courtney sneered. The manager looked at Courtney, then at Lila. He was a coward. He didn't want to lose a wealthy customer. "Look, miss," he said to Courtney, "I can comp your meal, but I can't make her pay $2,000. She doesn't have it." "Then fire her," Courtney demanded. "Fire her, or I will sue this dump into the ground. I will write reviews that will shut you down in a week. Do you know who I am? My father-in-law owns half the logistics in this city." I flinched. She was using my name. She was using the reputation I built with sweat and blood to terrorize a waitress in a diner. The manager sighed. He looked at Lila. "I am sorry, Lila," he said. "You are causing too much trouble. Hand in your apron. You are done." Lila dropped to her knees. She ignored the broken glass cutting into her uniform. She clasped her hands together. "Please, Mr. Henderson," she begged. "Please don't fire me. My mom is in the hospital. She starts chemo next week. I need the insurance. I need the paycheck. If I lose this job, we lose the apartment. Please. I will work for free. Just don't fire me. My heart hammered in my chest. A sick mother. Hospital bills. The fear of losing a home. This girl was living the reality I had pretended to live for 5 years, and she was facing it with more dignity on her knees than my son was sitting in his leather jacket. Courtney laughed. She actually laughed. "Oh, here comes the sob story," she mocked. "My mom is sick. My dog died. Save it for the jury, honey. You ruined my property. Pay up or get out." Then Damon spoke. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked down at the girl kneeling in the spilled water and French fries. He swirled the ice in his drink. "Tell you what," he said, his voice smooth and cruel, the voice of a man who has never suffered. "If you don't have the cash, there is another way you can pay." He pointed to Courtney's wet shoe. "Those shoes are imported," he said. "We don't want water spots on them, so why don't you crawl over here and lick them clean?" The diner went deadly silent. Even the cook in the back stopped scraping the grill. Lila looked up at him, horrified. "What?" "You heard me," Damon said, grinning. "Use your tongue. Lick the water off. If you do a good job, maybe we will forget about the $2,000. Consider it a tip." He laughed. A low, dark sound. Courtney joined in, giggling like a schoolgirl. That was the moment. That was the exact second the last thread of affection I held for my son snapped. It didn't just break, it disintegrated. I wasn't looking at my son anymore. I was looking at a monster, a bully, a weak, pathetic man who got off on humiliating people he thought were beneath him. I set my soup bowl down on an empty table. I didn't care about the hunger anymore. The rage was feeding me. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I felt the thick envelope of cash I had taken from Bernie's safe. $10,000, all in hundreds. I pulled my scarf up over my nose. I pulled my beanie down to my eyebrows. I hunched my shoulders. I walked over to their table. My shadow fell over them. Damon looked up, annoyed. Courtney looked disgusted. "What do you want, old man?" Courtney snapped. "Can't you see we are busy?" I didn't speak. Not yet. I looked at Lila, still kneeling on the floor, crying silently. I reached down and took her arm. My grip was firm. "Get up, child," I rasped. My voice was a wreck from the intubation tube. It sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. It didn't sound like Gus Freeman. It sounded like death. Lila looked at me confused, but she stood up. I turned to Courtney. I looked at those red-bottomed shoes, the shoes bought with my stolen money. I reached into my coat and pulled out the stack of bills. It was a brick of cash. Damon's eyes went wide. He sat up straight. The boredom vanished instantly, replaced by greed. I threw the money on the table. It landed with a heavy thud, right in the middle of their drinks. "Here," I growled. My voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a sentence. $10,000. For the shoes. Courtney stared at the money. She reached out and touched it, as if checking if it was real. She fanned the bills. Her anger evaporated, instantly replaced by a predatory smile. "Whoa," she said, looking at me. "Who are you?" "I am nobody," I said. "Just a ghost passing through." I pointed a shaking finger at Lila. "Leave the girl alone," I said. "She has paid her debt." Damon reached for the money. He grabbed a handful of bills. "Well, look at that," he chuckled. "The hobo has cash. Where did you get this, old-timer? Did you rob a bank? Or did you win the lottery?" Courtney laughed, stuffing the money into her purse, the purse she bought with my stolen pension. "He probably stole it from under someone's mattress," she said. "But money is money." She looked at me with pure disdain. She didn't recognize her own father-in-law. She didn't recognize the coat she had seen hanging in the hall closet for 3 years. She only saw the cash. "All right, Grandpa," she said, waving her hand dismissively like she was swatting a fly. "You paid the toll. You can go now. Unless you want to lick the other shoe for another $10,000. She cackled at her own joke. I stood there for a second longer. I memorized their faces. I memorized the cruelty in their eyes. I memorized the way my son looked counting the money that I had earned with 40 years of labor. He didn't care where it came from. He didn't care about the old man standing in front of him. He just cared about the intake. I turned to Lila. "Keep your head up," I whispered to her. Then I turned and walked away. I heard them laughing behind me. "Can you believe that?" Courtney said. "What a crazy old fool. $10,000 for a pair of wet shoes? We are going to Miami, baby. I pushed open the door of the diner and stepped back out into the cold night. The wind was still howling, but I didn't feel it. I felt hot. I felt alive. I walked to the corner where my taxi was waiting. "You done?" the driver asked. "No," I said, climbing in. "I am just getting started. Take me to the TV station, Channel 5. The driver looked at me. "Channel 5? At this hour?" "I have a story to tell," I said, "and I want the whole world to hear it." As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the diner. I saw Damon and Courtney inside, raising a toast. They thought they had won. They thought they had just scored a free payday from a senile stranger. They didn't know that the $10,000 was just the bait, and they had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. Tonight, I wasn't just Augustus Freeman, the victim. Tonight, I was the director, and the final act was about to begin on live television. I sat there in the booth for one last moment, staring at the back of my son's head. He was laughing at something Courtney had said, probably another joke about how stupid the waitress was, or how easy it was to take money from a senile old man. They were drunk on their own cruelty. They had $10,000 in cash, sitting in a designer purse, and they thought they were the kings of Chicago. They didn't know that $10,000 was just the appetizer. The main course was sitting right under my coffee cup. I reached into my inner coat pocket and pulled out my checkbook. It was a sleek, black leather book that felt heavy in my hand. It wasn't the checkbook I used for groceries. It wasn't the account Courtney had hacked. This was the Freeman Trust account, the one that Bernie managed, the one that held the weight of an empire. I uncapped my pen. My hand didn't shake. The tremors from the surgery, the cold and the shock were gone, replaced by a clarity that was sharp as a razor blade. I wrote the date. I wrote the name Lila Jenkins, and then I wrote the numbers. 1,000,000. $1 million. I looked at the number. It was a lot of money. To most people, it was a lifetime of security. To me, it was the price of a lesson. It was the cost of waking up from a 5-year nightmare. I signed my name at the bottom. Not Gus, but Augustus Freeman. The signature was bold and sweeping, the same signature that had authorized the purchase of fleets of trucks and massive warehouses. I folded the check carefully. I didn't want her to see it right away. I placed it under the napkin next to my empty soup bowl. I weighed it down with the salt shaker. I stood up. My knees popped, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt light. I felt like I was floating. I pulled my scarf up tight, but as I turned to leave, I made a calculated decision. I reached up and adjusted my beanie, pushing it back just enough to expose my face, just enough for the security camera mounted above the cash register to get a clear look. I walked past Damon and Courtney's table one last time. They didn't look up. They were too busy taking selfies with their cocktails. I was invisible to them. I was just background noise in the movie of their lives. "Enjoy the drinks," I whispered under my breath. "They are the last ones you will ever taste on my dime." I pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. The taxi was waiting. The ride to the city center took 30 minutes. As we crossed the bridge, the skyline of Chicago rose up to meet me, glittering like a crown of diamonds against the velvet sky. This was my city. I had helped build it, and for too long, I had been hiding in its shadows. The taxi pulled up to the Millennium Tower. The doorman, a man named Henry, who had worked there for 20 years, rushed to open the door. He didn't see a homeless man. He saw the owner of the penthouse. "Mr. Freeman," Henry said, his eyes wide with concern. "We didn't expect you. Are you all right? You look—" "I am fine, Henry," I interrupted, handing him a $100 bill. "Just tired. Please don't announce me to anyone." I walked through the marble lobby. The air smelled of lilies and expensive polish. It was a stark contrast to the grease and despair of the diner. I took the private elevator to the 60th floor. As the doors closed, I leaned my head back against the mirrored wall. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and the exhaustion was creeping back in. My chest throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. The elevator opened directly into my penthouse. I stepped inside. The lights flickered on, automatically sensing my presence. It was a massive space. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the frozen lake. White marble floors, modern art on the walls, leather furniture that cost more than the house Damon lived in. This was the secret I had kept for 5 years. This was the sanctuary I retreated to when the charade of being a poor pensioner became too much. But I had never stayed here for long. I always went back to the basement, back to the lie, because I thought it was the right thing to do for my son. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I took my heart medication. Then I walked to the living room and sat down in the armchair that faced the city. I picked up the remote and turned on the massive 80-inch television mounted on the wall. I checked my watch. It had been 2 hours since I left the diner. It was time. I tuned into Channel 5 News. The anchor, a woman with severe hair and a serious expression, was shuffling papers on her desk. "We have a developing story coming in from the South Side," she said. "A story that is warming hearts all over Chicago on this freezing night. We go live to Mike Reynolds, who is standing outside the 9th Street Diner. Mike, what is happening down there?" The screen cut to a reporter standing in the snow outside the neon sign of the diner I had just left. A small crowd had gathered. Police lights were flashing in the background. "Well, Diane," the reporter shouted over the wind, "it is an absolute frenzy down here. About 2 hours ago, a mysterious man walked into this diner, ordered a bowl of soup, and left a tip that has shocked the entire staff." The camera panned to show Lila standing in the doorway of the diner. She was wrapped in a blanket, her face puffy from crying. She was holding a piece of paper in her trembling hands. "This waitress, Lila Jenkins, was having a terrible night," the reporter continued. "Witnesses say she was harassed by a couple of customers and was on the verge of being fired. But then, an unknown patron stepped in. He left this." The camera zoomed in on the check in Lila's hands. The image was shaky, but the numbers were clear. $1 million. The anchor back in the studio gasped. $1 million, Mike. Is it real? "The bank has verified it," the reporter said. "But that is not the biggest part of the story. Who was this mystery benefactor? Was it a lottery winner? A prankster?" We obtained security footage from the diner owner, and what we found has stunned everyone. My heart began to hammer in my chest. This was it, the reveal. The screen changed to grain black and white footage. It showed me sitting in the booth. It showed me writing the check. And then it showed me standing up. It showed me looking directly at the camera and pushing my hat back. The reporter's voice rose in excitement. "Viewers, take a close look at this face. We ran this image through our archives. This is not a homeless man. This is not a random stranger. This is Augustus Freeman." The name flashed on the screen in big red letters. Augustus Freeman. The anchor's jaw dropped. Augustus Freeman, the logistics tycoon. I thought he retired years ago. Rumors were he had moved to an island. "He didn't move to an island," Diane, the reporter, said. "He has been right here in Chicago. And tonight he came out of hiding to perform an act of incredible generosity. Augustus Freeman, the man who built an empire from a single truck, has just changed this young waitress's life forever." The camera went back to Lila. She was sobbing into the microphone. "I didn't know who he was," she cried. "He just looked so sad. He looked like he was cold. I gave him some crackers, and he saved my life. My mom can get her surgery now. I can keep my house. He is an angel." I watched the screen, my own eyes misting over. An angel. She called me an angel. But then the reporter turned the knife. "We also have reports that Mr. Freeman was witnessed having an altercation with a young couple at the diner earlier in the evening," the reporter said. "Witnesses say the couple mocked him and threw money at him. We are trying to identify who these people were, but one thing is clear. Augustus Freeman saw the best of humanity in this waitress, and the worst of humanity in those patrons." I leaned forward. The camera panned to the side, catching a glimpse of Damon and Courtney being escorted out of the diner by the police who were clearing the scene. They looked confused, they looked annoyed, and then they looked up at the TV monitors mounted inside the diner window. I saw the exact moment the realization hit them. I saw Damon freeze. I saw his mouth form the word "Dad." I saw Courtney grab his arm, her face going white as the snow around her. They saw my face on the screen. They heard the name Augustus Freeman. They heard the words $1 million. They realized that the old man in the beanie wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a ghost. He was the bank. He was the golden goose they had been trying to kill for 3 years, and he had just given away their inheritance to a stranger on live television. My phone, which had been silent on the coffee table, suddenly buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. It started to vibrate so hard it rattled against the glass surface of the table. I picked it up. Damon. calling. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. Courtney, calling. I looked at the screen. I looked at the names of the people who had told me to stay in the hospital. The people who had told me it was nice without me. The phone rang and rang, a symphony of panic. I sat back in my leather chair. I took a sip of water. I watched the news cycle repeat the story. I watched Lila cry tears of joy. I watched the footage of me walking out into the night. 80 times. That is how many times they called in the next hour. 80 desperate, frantic, terrified calls. I didn't decline them. I didn't turn the phone off. I let it ring. I wanted them to hear the silence on the other end. I wanted them to know that I was there, watching, listening, and choosing not to answer. I was a ghost after all, and ghosts don't answer the phone. The news anchor came back on the screen. "If you are watching, Mr. Freeman," she said, looking into the camera, "thank you. Chicago thanks you." I smiled, a cold, hard smile. "You are welcome," I whispered, "but the show isn't over yet." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. Somewhere down there in the cold, dark streets, my son and his wife were scrambling. They were realizing that the locks on the house wouldn't work. They were realizing that the credit cards were dead. They were realizing that the winter had finally come for them. I placed my hand on the cold glass. "Welcome to the real world, Damon," I said. "I hope you brought a warm coat, because it is going to be a long, cold night." The Velvet Room was the kind of place where a bottle of water costs more than a tank of gas. It was loud, it was dark, and it smelled of expensive cologne and desperate ambition. Damon and Courtney were sitting in a VIP booth, surrounded by velvet ropes, acting like they owned the city. They had ordered 3 bottles of Dom Perignon. They had ordered a seafood tower. They were throwing cash around like confetti. And the saddest part was that it was my cash. It was the $10,000 I had thrown on the table at the diner just an hour ago. The money I gave them to pay for the waitress's dignity. They were drinking it. They were laughing about the crazy old hobo who had walked in off the street and handed them a fortune. I wasn't there in the bar, but I can see it as clearly as if I were watching a security tape. I know my son. I know his wife. I know that right now, Courtney was probably holding up her glass, looking at the bubbles, and making a toast to her own genius. She was probably telling Damon that they were born lucky. She was probably saying that the universe owed them this. But the universe has a funny way of collecting its debts, and the bill collectors were about to arrive in the form of a 60-inch flat-screen television mounted above the bar. The music in the club was thumping, a heavy bass line that rattled the teeth. But then, it stopped. The DJ cut the sound. Usually, this means a celebrity has walked in or a fight has broken out. But tonight, the DJ got on the microphone. "Yo, everyone, look at the screens," the DJ said. "You aren't going to believe this. Some guy just tipped $1 million down the street." The massive screens behind the bar, which usually played abstract geometric shapes, switched to the live feed of Channel 5 News. The breaking news banner was bright red. "Miracle on 9th Street." The entire club turned to look. Drunks, socialites, bartenders, and bouncers. They all froze. Courtney swirled her champagne, looking bored. She didn't care about miracles. She only cared about herself. Damon glanced up, his eyes glassy from the alcohol. Then, the image changed. It showed the security footage from the diner. It showed a man in a hospital gown and a wool coat standing up from a booth. It showed him adjusting his beanie. It showed his face. Courtney froze. Her glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Damon squinted. He leaned forward. The news anchor's voice cut through the silence of the bar. "We have confirmed the identity of the mystery benefactor," the anchor announced. "He is not a homeless man. He is the reclusive billionaire and former logistics tycoon, Augustus Freeman." The name echoed through the club. Augustus Freeman. On the screen, a file photo of me from 10 years ago appeared next to the grainy security footage. I was wearing a suit. I looked younger, stronger, but the eyes were the same. The caption read, "Net worth estimated at $50 million. Courtney's hand went limp. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It hit the edge of the glass table and shattered. Champagne sprayed over her dress, over the leather seats, over the pile of $100 bills they had spread out on the table. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of horror. Damon stood up. He knocked his chair over. He looked like he had been shot. That is Dad," he stammered. He looked around the bar, as if waiting for someone to tell him it was a prank. He looked at the bartender. He looked at Courtney. "Courtney, that is Dad," he yelled, his voice cracking. "That is Augustus Freeman." Courtney turned slowly to look at him. Her face was pale, stripped of all its makeup and arrogance. $50 million, she whispered. The words came out like a choke. Damon grabbed his hair. He started pacing in the small VIP booth. "He told me he was a truck driver," Damon shouted. "He told me he was broke. He told me he lived on a pension. He made me pay for his cable bill, Courtney. He made me buy him generic brand cereal." He looked back at the screen, where the reporter was talking about my empire. "He owns the logistics company?" Damon whispered, the reality crashing down on him like a falling shipping container. "I applied for a job there 5 years ago. I got rejected. My own father owns the company?" Then, the memory hit them. It hit them harder than the alcohol. They remembered the hospital, the text messages, "Call a taxi, I'm watching TV." They remembered the diner, the shoes, the water. They remembered telling the old man, the man worth $50 million, to lick the floor. Courtney let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She grabbed her purse, the purse she had bought with my stolen money. "Call him," she shrieked. "Damon, call him right now." Damon fumbled for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it on the wet floor. He scrambled to pick it up, wiping the champagne off the screen with his sleeve. He dialed my number. Back in my penthouse, 60 floors above them, the silence was beautiful. I was sitting in my leather armchair, a cup of chamomile tea steaming in my hand. I was looking out at the city lights, feeling the warmth return to my body. Then, the silence was broken. Buzz, buzz, buzz. My phone was sitting on the coffee table. The screen lit up. The picture of Damon flashed. It was a picture of him from his college graduation, smiling, full of promise. A promise he had broken a long time ago. I watched it ring. I took a sip of tea. It was hot. It was soothing. The ringing stopped. Then it started again instantly. Buzz, buzz, buzz. This time it was Courtney. I imagined the panic in that bar. I imagined them screaming at each other. I imagined the realization sinking in that they had just bitten the hand that fed them, and they had bitten it right off. A text message popped up on the screen. "Daddy, please pick up. We are so worried about you. We saw the news. Are you okay? Where are you?" I laughed, a dry, humorless chuckle. Daddy. She hadn't called me Daddy since she wanted me to pay for her wedding dress. Another text. "Dad, it was a joke. The text at the hospital was a joke. We were on our way to get you, but we got a flat tire. Please call me back." A flat tire. They were lying even now. Even while drowning, they were still trying to swim with weights on their ankles. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Damon again. "Dad, I love you. Please. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell us? We are family. We need to talk. Family." The word looked strange on the screen. Family doesn't leave you to freeze. Family doesn't mock you when you are down. Family doesn't steal from your retirement fund to buy shoes. I watched the number of missed calls climb. 10, 20, 30. I poured myself another cup of tea. 40, 50. My phone was vibrating so hard it was dancing across the glass table. It was a frantic, desperate dance. It was the sound of greed, panic-stricken. They weren't calling because they loved me. They were calling because they loved the $50 million they just realized they had lost. 60, 70. I picked up the remote and turned up the volume on the TV. The reporter was interviewing the owner of the diner now. He was saying what a nice, quiet man I was. 80 calls. 80 times they tried to reach the ghost. I finally reached out and picked up the phone. I didn't slide the bar to answer. I pressed the side button. Silence. The ringing stopped. The screen went dark. I looked at my reflection in the black glass of the phone. I looked tired. I looked old. But I looked free. They would be running out of the bar now. They would be jumping in their car. They would be racing to the hospital, then to the house. They would be trying to find the man they thought they could control. But that man didn't exist anymore. I put the phone down. "Let them run," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them run until their lungs burn. Let them run until they realize that no matter how fast they go, they can never outrun what they did tonight." I stood up and walked to the window. Far below, in the grid of the city, I saw the tiny red lights of cars moving through the snow. One of them was probably my son, driving like a maniac, trying to salvage a fortune he had already spent. I took a deep breath. "Sleep well, Damon," I said, "because tomorrow the eviction notice arrives, and tomorrow the real education begins." I sat in my penthouse watching the GPS tracker on my phone. The little blue dot representing Damon's car was moving at 80 miles an hour down the interstate. They were racing toward the hospital. They were breaking speed limits and running red lights, not because they were worried about my heart, but because they were worried about my wallet. I could imagine the scene inside that car. The screaming, the blame, the panic. They were rushing back to the scene of the crime, hoping that the victim was still there, waiting to be manipulated one last time. But the bed was empty. When they arrived at the hospital, they didn't find a frail old man. They found Maya. I know this because Maya texted me later that night with a grim satisfaction. She told me they ran into the ward breathless and smelling of expensive champagne. Courtney was crying fake tears, asking where her beloved father-in-law was. Damon was demanding to see the doctor. Maya told them the truth. She told them I had walked out into the cold 3 hours ago. She told them I had left alone because my family was too busy watching a football game to come get me. She said the look on their faces wasn't shame, it was terror. They realized they had lost the physical location of the asset. They realized I was loose in the city with $50 million and a grudge. The blue dot on my phone screen spun around. They were leaving the hospital. They were heading for the only other place they thought I could be. The house on Elm Street. The house they called theirs. The house where they had laughed at me on Instagram just a few hours before. I took a sip of tea and waited. I had timed this perfectly. Bernie was already there. The drive to the house usually took 30 minutes. Damon made it in 15. I watched the dot pull into the driveway. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine the cold wind hitting their faces as they stepped out of the warm car. They probably expected to see lights on. They probably expected to find me sitting in the kitchen waiting for an apology so I could hand over the checkbook. Instead, they found darkness. The house was pitch black. I had instructed the power company to cut the service an hour ago. No heat, no lights, just a silent, frozen monument to their ungratefulness. Damon and Courtney ran up the front steps. The snow was deep here, unshoveled because Damon was too lazy to do it, and I wasn't there to do it for him. Courtney slipped in her Louboutin heels, the same heels she had terrorized the waitress over. She cursed, screaming at the ice, screaming at the house, screaming at the world. Damon got to the door first. He jammed his key into the lock. He turned it. Nothing happened. He tried again. He jiggled it. He pulled the handle. The door didn't budge. It wasn't stuck. It was changed. The locksmith I hired had done his job efficiently. The old tumblers were gone. The key to the kingdom had been revoked. "What is wrong?" Courtney shrieked, shivering in her fur stole. "Open the door, Damon. It is freezing out here." "It won't turn," Damon yelled, rattling the handle. "The key won't turn. It is like it is the wrong key. Let me try it." Courtney pushed him aside. She jammed her key in. She twisted it with violent force. Snap! The key broke off in the lock. She screamed a sound of pure frustration. She kicked the door, leaving a scuff mark on the paint I had applied myself 3 summers ago. "Open up!" she screamed, pounding on the wood. "Gus, I know you are in there. Open this door right now. This isn't funny." There was no answer. Only the wind howling through the bare branches of the oak tree in the front yard. Then suddenly the darkness was shattered. Blue and red lights flooded the driveway. A siren chirped once short and authoritative. Damon and Courtney spun around, blinding their eyes against the glare. A police cruiser was parked at the end of the driveway, blocking their exit. Next to it stood a black sedan. The door of the sedan opened and Bernie Steinberg stepped out. Bernie is a small man, but in that moment he must have looked like a giant. He was wearing his heavy wool trench coat and a fedora. He walked up the driveway, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. He didn't look like a family friend. He looked like the Reaper. "Who are you?" Courtney yelled, shielding her eyes. "Get these lights out of my face. We live here. We are locked out." Bernie stopped 10 feet away from them. He held a leather briefcase in his gloved hands. He looked at Damon. He looked at Courtney. He looked at the broken key in the lock. "You don't live here anymore," Bernie said, his voice calm and cold, cutting through the wind. Damon stepped forward, trying to use his height to intimidate the lawyer. Look, pal, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my house. My dad bought it for me. Now tell the cops to leave and help us get inside. My dad is missing and we need to check if he is in there. Your father is safe, Bernie said. He is in a secure location far away from you. And as for this house, Augustus Freeman never bought it for you, Damon. He bought it for himself. Your name isn't on the deed. Your name isn't on the mortgage. Your name isn't even on the utility bills. Damon's face went pale in the flashing police lights. He knew it was true. I had always told him I would put it in his name eventually, but I never did. I kept control, because I knew deep down that a day like this might come. That is a lie, Courtney screamed. We have lived here for 3 years. This is our home. My clothes are in there. My jewelry is in there. You can't just lock us out. That is illegal. Squatters' rights. I know the law. Bernie laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. You are not squatters, Mrs. Freeman, Bernie said. You are guests. Guests who have overstayed their welcome. And as for the law, I suggest you look at this. Bernie opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Sheriff's Department. He handed it to one of the officers who stepped forward and presented it to Damon. What is this? Damon whispered, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the paper. It is an emergency eviction order granted by a judge about an hour ago, Bernie explained, based on credible threats of elder abuse, financial theft, and malicious negligence. Elder abuse, Courtney gasped. That is insane. We never touched him. Negligence, Bernie corrected. You left a man who just had open-heart surgery stranded in a freezing parking lot while you went drinking. You stole money from his accounts, and you publicly mocked him on social media, wishing him dead so you could inherit his property. Bernie paused, letting the words sink in. The judge found the evidence quite compelling, especially the Instagram video where you called him a ghost. Well, congratulations. The ghost has haunted the house. He has reclaimed it. Damon looked at the paper. He looked at the house. He looked at the police officers who were now resting their hands on their belts, waiting for a reason to intervene. But where are we supposed to go? Damon asked, his voice breaking. It is 5 degrees below zero. We have no clothes. We have nothing. Bernie checked his watch. He looked bored. That sounds like a personal problem, he said. You are young. You are healthy. Or at least you were healthy enough to drink 3 bottles of champagne an hour ago. I am sure you can figure it out. He pointed to the street. But you cannot stay here. If you remain on this property for another 5 minutes, these officers will arrest you for criminal trespassing. Courtney lost it. She lunged at Bernie. You evil little lawyer, she shrieked. You can't do this. I will sue you. I will call the press. The police officer stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Ma'am, take a step back, he warned. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Courtney looked at Damon. Do something, she yelled. You are the man. Defend your home. Damon looked at the officer. He looked at the gun on the officer's hip. He looked at the cold, dark house that was no longer his. The fight went out of him. He realized he had no leverage. He was playing poker against a man who owned the casino. Come on, Court, Damon whispered, grabbing her arm. Let's go. Go where? She screamed, pulling away. I don't know, Damon said, tears freezing on his cheeks. Just away, before we get arrested. He dragged her toward the car. She fought him, screaming obscenities, cursing my name, cursing Bernie, cursing the waitress. Bernie watched them go. He didn't move until they were back in their car and backing out of the driveway. As they pulled away into the night, Bernie pulled out his phone. He dialed my number. It is done, Gus, he said. The rats are out of the nest. I watched the blue dot on my phone move away from the house, away from the comfort, away from the life I had subsidized for too long. Good work, Bernie, I said. Change the locks again, just to be safe, I added. And Bernie, yes, Gus, make sure the heat stays off tonight. I don't want to pay to warm an empty house. I hung up. I sat in the silence of my penthouse. I should have felt sad. A father should feel sad when his children are homeless. But I didn't feel sadness. I felt the satisfying click of a puzzle piece falling into place. They were out in the cold now, just like I was this afternoon. The only difference was I had a credit card and 50 years of grit. They had a bottle of champagne in their bellies and empty heads. The lesson had begun. The engine of the black Range Rover sputtered and died around 3 in the morning. It wasn't a mechanical failure, it was out of gas. Damon had been driving in circles for hours, trying to find a hotel that would take them, but the result was always the same. He would walk into the lobby, his designer shoes clicking on the marble floors, looking like a man who owned the place. He would slap his platinum card on the counter. The clerk would smile, run the card, and then the smile would vanish. Declined. Please try another method of payment. They tried the Ritz-Carlton. Declined. They tried the Hilton. Declined. They tried a roadside motel with flickering neon lights that charged $40 a night. Declined. I had been thorough. When I told Bernie to scorch the earth, I meant every blade of grass. I didn't just freeze the accounts, I flagged their identities for potential fraud. No hotel in the city of Chicago would rent a room to a Freeman that night. So there they were, my son and his wife sitting in a $100,000 car that was rapidly becoming a freezing metal coffin, parked in the back corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. The silence in the car was heavier than the snow piling up on the windshield. The heater fan spun down into a low whine and then stopped completely. The warmth began to bleed out of the cabin, instantly sucked away by the ruthless Chicago winter. Courtney was curled up in the passenger seat, wrapped in her fur stole, but the fur couldn't stop the cold from seeping into her bones. She was shivering violently. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in black streaks, making her look like a raccoon that had been caught in the rain. She stared out the window at the bleak gray wall of the supermarket. She wasn't thinking about how to fix this. She was looking for someone to blame, and the only person left to blame was sitting in the driver's seat. Damon gripped the steering wheel with gloved hands. He was staring at the fuel gauge, the needle resting dead on empty. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone. The swagger was gone. He was just a 30-year-old man who realized he didn't know how to survive without his father's wallet. "This is your fault," Courtney whispered. Her voice was low, venomous. It broke the silence like a cracking sheet of ice. Damon didn't answer. He just breathed out a cloud of white vapor. "I said this is your fault," Courtney said louder, turning to face him. Her teeth chattered, but her eyes were burning with rage. "If you had just gotten off the couch, if you had just paused your stupid video game and driven to the hospital, none of this would be happening." Damon tightened his grip on the wheel. "I didn't know," he muttered. "You didn't know what?" Courtney shrieked. "You didn't know your father was a multimillionaire. You didn't know he was the Augustus Freeman. You are his son, Damon. How could you be so stupid? How could you live with him for 30 years and not know he was sitting on $50 million? She laughed, a high-pitched manic sound that grated on his nerves. "You call yourself a businessman," she spat. "You are a joke. You couldn't even manage your own father. You let him trick you. You let him play poor while he was hoarding a fortune. And because you are an idiot, I am sleeping in a car in a Walmart parking lot." Damon turned his head slowly. His jaw was clenched so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. "Shut up, Courtney," he said. "Make me," Courtney challenged. She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the smell of stale fear in the car. "You had one job, Damon. Secure the bag. That is all you had to do. Keep the old man happy until he kicked the bucket. But no, you had to be lazy. You had to text him to take a taxi." Damon slammed his hand on the dashboard. "I texted him because you told me to," he yelled. "I did not," Courtney lied, instantly rewriting history in her head. "Yes, you did," Damon screamed. "You were the one complaining about the house being messy. You were the one who said you didn't want to deal with his bandages. You said let him rot in there for another month." "I was joking," Courtney yelled back. "I have a dark sense of humor, Damon. You know that. But you are the son. You should have known better. If you had just driven that 20 minutes, we would be in the penthouse right now. We would be drinking champagne. We would be rich, Damon. Rich." She poked him hard in the chest with a manicured fingernail. "Instead, you gave him away. You gave him to a waitress. A waitress, Damon. That dirty little girl at the diner has my $1 million. She has my future. And it is all because you were too lazy to put on a coat." Damon looked at her. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had defended against his own father. He saw the greed etched into every line of her face. He saw the selfishness that rotted her from the inside out. And for the first time in his life, he saw himself. He saw how pathetic he had been to follow her. "I gave you everything," Damon whispered, his voice trembling. I bought you that fur. I bought you that ring. I stole money from my dad's pension for your shoes. And look where it got us, Courtney sneered. Homeless, freezing. You are useless, Damon. You are a weak, spineless little boy who can't provide for his wife. If it wasn't for your dad's money, I wouldn't have looked at you twice. I would have spit on you. Something inside Damon snapped. It was the sound of a cable parting under too much tension. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just reacted. He swung his hand. Crack. His palm connected with her cheek. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a slap born of 3 years of repressed anger, 3 years of emasculation, 3 years of being told what to do. Courtney's head whipped to the side. She gasped, holding her cheek. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked back at him, her eyes wide with shock. She touched her face, where a red mark was already blooming on her pale skin. "You hit me," she whispered. Damon stared at his hand. He was breathing hard, puffing white clouds into the freezing air. He looked terrified of what he had done, but he didn't apologize. "You wouldn't shut up," he said, his voice shaking. "You just wouldn't shut up." Courtney stared at him. For a second, he thought she was going to attack him. He thought she was going to scratch his eyes out, but she didn't. She started to laugh. It was a low, crazy chuckle that built into a cackle. She slumped back in her seat, pulling her fur coat tighter. "Wow," she said. "Look at you. You finally grew a pair. Too bad. It is about 10 years too late." She turned away from him, looking back out the window at the snow. "Whatever, Damon," she muttered. "Hit me all you want. It doesn't change the fact that we are broke. It doesn't change the fact that your dad hates us." Damon slumped against the steering wheel. He buried his face in his hands. He felt the cold seeping through his jacket, numbing his fingers. He felt the hunger gnawing at his stomach. "We have to fix this," he whispered. "We have to get him back." "How?" Courtney asked tiredly. "He blocked our numbers. He evicted us. He gave $1 million to a stranger just to spite us. He is done with us, Damon." "No," Damon said, lifting his head. "He isn't done. He is my father. He is angry. Yes, he is hurt. But he is still my dad. He raised me. He can't just turn that off." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The battery was at 12%. He opened the news app. The story of Augustus Freeman was still trending. The headline read, "The Billionaire Hero." "Look at this," Damon said, shoving the phone in Courtney's face. "Look at the narrative. The media loves him. They think he is a saint." "So what?" Courtney said, rubbing her cheek. "So we change the narrative," Damon said, his eyes lighting up with a desperate plan. "We play the victims." He sat up straighter, ignoring the cold. "Think about it, Court. Why did he give away that money? Because he was lonely. Because he felt abandoned. What if we go on TV? What if we tell the world that it was all a misunderstanding? What if we tell them that we were frantically looking for him, that he wandered off in a state of dementia?" "Dementia?" Courtney asked, looking at him. "Yes," Damon said, talking faster. "He just had heart surgery. The anesthesia messes with your brain in old people. We say he was confused. We say the text messages were him hallucinating. We say we have been driving around all night, crying, looking for our beloved father." Courtney sat up. The greed flickered back into her eyes, replacing the anger. "We paint ourselves as the worried children," she said, slowly catching on, "and him as the confused old man who is being taken advantage of by the media and that waitress." "Exactly," Damon said. "If we get on TV, if we cry, if we look pathetic enough, the public will turn. They will feel sorry for us. And Dad cares about his reputation. If he sees us begging for him to come home on national television, he will have to respond. He can't leave us out in the cold if the whole world is watching." Courtney reached up and fixed her hair in the rearview mirror. She looked at the red mark on her cheek. "This mark," she said, pointing to where he had slapped her. "I am sorry," Damon started. "No, don't be," Courtney interrupted, a cruel smile spreading across her lips. "It is perfect. We will say, I got it running through the woods looking for him. Or maybe we say we got mugged while searching. It adds to the drama. It makes us look more sympathetic." She looked at Damon. "You are right," she said. "We go to the TV station, Channel 5. They are the ones who broke the story. We go there first thing in the morning." "But how?" Damon asked, looking at the dashboard. "The car is dead. We have no gas." "We walk," Courtney said. "Walk?" Damon asked. It is 5 miles. In the snow. Courtney opened the door. The wind howled, rushing into the car. Then we walk, she said. If we walk, we will look even worse. We will look frozen. We will look like we suffered. That is what the cameras want, Damon. They want suffering. She stepped out into the slush. Come on, she commanded. We have a performance to give. Damon looked at her. He looked at the cold, dark parking lot. He hated her. He truly hated her in that moment. But he needed her. He needed her acting skills. He needed her manipulation. Because without the old man's money, he was nothing. He opened his door and stepped out. They began to walk. 2 figures huddled together against the wind, trudging through the dirty snow toward the city lights. They weren't walking toward redemption. They were walking toward a trap, because they didn't know that Augustus Freeman was waiting. They didn't know that the TV interview they were planning to hijack was already set up. And the director of this show wasn't Channel 5. It was the Ghost. And he had saved the best twist for last. The studio lights were hotter than I expected. They beat down on my face, a stark contrast to the freezing wind I had walked through the night before. I sat in a comfortable beige armchair across from Diane, the anchorwoman who had broken the story. She was leaning forward, her eyes shining with that mix of journalistic curiosity and genuine admiration. The red light on camera 1 was glowing steady and unblinking. We were live. Millions of people across Chicago, maybe across the country, were waking up, pouring their coffee, and watching the old man who had tipped $1 million to a waitress. I had agreed to the interview on one condition. It had to be live. No edits, no cuts, no chance for anyone to spin the narrative. I wanted the truth to be raw and unfiltered. Diane smiled at me. Mr. Freeman, she said, her voice smooth as silk, the world is captivated by your generosity. You gave away a fortune to a young woman you had never met. Lila Jenkins says you saved her life. But the question everyone is asking is why? Why a stranger? Why a diner on the South Side? You have a family, don't you? You have a son. I nodded, slowly. I adjusted the lapel of the suit Bernie had brought me this morning. It was a sharp, charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection. I didn't look like the homeless man from last night anymore. I looked like Augustus Freeman, the CEO. I do have a son, Diane, I said, my voice calm and measured. His name is Damon, and I have a daughter-in-law named Courtney, and I love them very much, or at least, I loved the idea of them. Diane tilted her head. That sounds complicated, she said. It is, I agreed. You see, Diane, wealth is a magnifying glass. If you are a good person, money makes you better. You can build hospitals, you can feed the hungry. But if you are a broken person, money just cracks you open wider. It feeds your ego, it starves your soul. I spent 5 years hiding my wealth from my family because I wanted to see who they were when the checkbook was closed. I paused. I looked directly into the lens of the camera. And last night, I found out, I said softly. Diane was about to ask a follow-up question. She opened her mouth, but the sound that came out wasn't her voice. It was a scream from the back of the studio. Dad! Oh my God, Dad! The sound tore through the quiet professional atmosphere of the newsroom. Heads turned. Cameramen swung their lenses around. The floor director waved his arms frantically. I didn't flinch. I knew this was coming. I had told security to let them in. I had left the gate open for the wolves. Damon and Courtney burst onto the set. They looked horrific. They were a masterpiece of calculated misery. Their clothes were wrinkled and stained with slush. Courtney's expensive fur stole was matted and wet. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in black rivulets, making her look like a grieving widow. Damon looked pale, his lips chapped and blue from the cold, his eyes wild and bloodshot. They rushed past the stunned cameramen. They rushed past the floor director who made a half-hearted attempt to block them. They ran straight for the interview stage. Dad! Courtney shrieked, throwing herself at me. She crashed into my chair, wrapping her arms around my neck. She smelled of stale champagne, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. She buried her face in my shoulder and began to sob. It was a loud, heaving, theatrical sob that shook her entire body. Oh, thank God, we found you. We were so worried. Damon fell to his knees beside my chair. He grabbed my hand, the hand that had signed the $1 million check, and pressed it to his forehead. He was shaking. Dad, he choked out. Why did you leave? Why didn't you tell us? We have been driving all night. We checked every hospital. We checked the morgue. We thought you were dead. The cameras were eating it up." Diane looked shocked, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the drama unfold. She looked at the producer in the booth. The producer signaled to keep rolling. This was television gold, the tearful reunion, the prodigal children finding their lost father. Courtney pulled back, her hands cupping my face. She looked into my eyes with a desperation that looked almost like love, if you didn't know better. "Look at you," she cried, wiping a smudge of dirt from her own cheek to highlight her suffering. "You are confused, aren't you? You don't know where you are. It is the anesthesia, isn't it? The doctor said this might happen." She turned to the camera, tears streaming down her face. She pointed to the red mark on her cheek, the one Damon had given her in the car. "He is sick," she shouted to the audience. "My father-in-law is confused. He just had open-heart surgery 3 days ago. He wandered out of the hospital in a delirium. We have been searching for him in the snow for 12 hours. Look at us. We are frozen. We are terrified." She was good. I had to give her that. She was spinning a narrative of dementia and elder vulnerability. She was painting me as a senile old man who had given away $1 million because his brain was broken, not because his heart was broken. If I was declared incompetent, the check to the waitress could be voided. The power of attorney would go to them. They could take control of everything. Damon looked up at me, playing his part. "Dad, come home," he pleaded. "Please, you aren't safe here. You don't know what you were doing. That money, you didn't mean to give it away. You thought it was $5, didn't you? You are confused." The studio was silent. Diane looked at me with pity. The narrative was shifting. The hero was becoming a victim. I looked at Damon. I looked at Courtney. I felt their cold hands on me. I felt their desperation clawing at my suit. I didn't push them away. I didn't yell. I didn't call security. Instead, I smiled. It was a gentle smile, a grandfatherly smile, the kind of smile that hides a row of shark teeth. I reached out and patted Courtney's hand. I smoothed Damon's hair. There, I said soothingly. My voice was calm, steady, and completely lucid. I looked at Diane. I looked at the camera. "I am so glad you made it, children," I said. Courtney blinked. She stopped sobbing for a second, confused by my reaction. She expected me to be angry. She expected a fight. She didn't know how to handle kindness. You are?" she stammered. "Of course," I said warmly. "I was just talking about you." I turned back to the camera, keeping my hand on Damon's shoulder, trapping him there in the frame. "Diane," I said, addressing the anchor, "these are the children I was telling you about, my son Damon, and his wife Courtney." Diane nodded, recovering her composure. It is a relief to see them, Mr. Freeman. They seem very distressed." "They are," I agreed. "They have had a very long night." I looked down at Courtney. "You said you were looking for me?" I asked gently. "Yes," Courtney cried, clutching my lapel. "All night, Gus. We were frantic. We called the police. We drove through the blizzard." "And you, Damon?" I asked. "You were worried about my heart?" Damon nodded vigorously. "I was terrified, Dad. When the hospital said you were gone, I thought I lost you. I love you, Dad. I just want you safe." The audience at home must have been tearing up. It was a beautiful scene, a family reunited, love conquering confusion. But it was time to drop the curtain. I leaned back in my chair. I crossed my legs. I took a sip of water from the mug on the table. "Well, isn't that interesting?" I said. My tone changed. The warmth evaporated. The grandfatherly demeanor vanished, replaced by the cold steel of the business tycoon. "Because, Diane," I continued, looking at the anchor, "I was just explaining to the audience why I gave that $1 million to a waitress named Lila instead of to my own flesh and blood." Courtney froze. Her hands fell from my face. Damon stiffened. I turned to look at them. My eyes were hard now. "You say you were looking for me all night," I said. "You say you were worried. You say I am confused." I reached into my inner pocket. Courtney's eyes widened. She knew that move. It was the same move I made at the diner. I pulled out my phone. "But my phone tells a different story," I said. I tapped the screen. I held it up. But the screen was small. The camera couldn't see it clearly. "Diane," I said, "I took the liberty of sending some files to your production team before I went on air, just in case my family decided to drop by. Do you have them queued up?" Diane looked at her earpiece. She listened for a moment. Her eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at the shivering couple on the floor. "Yes, Mr. Freeman," she said slowly. "We have them." "Play them," I commanded. "No!" Courtney screamed. She lunged for me. She tried to grab the phone. She tried to block the camera. "Dad, don't!" Damon yelled, scrambling up. But it was too late. The giant screen behind us, the one that usually showed the weather map or the stock market ticker, flickered. The image changed. It wasn't a video of a blizzard. It wasn't a video of a search party. It was a screenshot. A simple, high-definition screenshot of a text message conversation. The timestamp was from yesterday afternoon. The contact name was Damon. The message read, "Call a taxi, Dad. I'm watching TV." A collective gasp went through the studio crew. Diane put her hand over her mouth. Courtney stared at the giant screen. Her face turned the color of ash. But I wasn't done. "Next slide," I said. The image changed again. This time, it was Courtney's message. "Stay in the hospital for another month. It is so nice without you." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. I looked at Courtney. She was trembling. But not from the cold anymore. She was trembling from the exposure. The mask of the loving daughter had been ripped off, revealing the rotting wood underneath. "You said I was confused, Courtney," I said, my voice booming through the studio. "You said I was delirious." I stood up. I towered over them. "Does that look like confusion to you? Or does that look like abandonment?" Damon tried to speak. "Dad, wait. That was out of context." "Context?" I asked. I turned to the camera. "Let's talk about context. Let's talk about the diner." I signaled the booth again. "Roll the tape," I said. And then, the real horror show began. The footage from the diner's security camera started to play on the giant screen behind us. And this time, there was audio. The image on the giant studio screen was crisp. It was high definition. It was undeniable. The text bubble was green, indicating it came from an iPhone, specifically the iPhone I paid the bill for every month. The timestamp read 4:15 p.m., 3 days ago. The words were etched in digital ink for millions of viewers to see. "Call a taxi, Dad. I am watching TV." The silence in the studio was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, before the screaming starts. I could hear the hum of the cameras. I could hear the ragged breathing of the two people kneeling beside me. Diane, the news anchor, stared at the screen. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked at Damon. She looked at the text. She looked back at Damon. The pity in her eyes evaporated instantly, replaced by a look of pure professional disgust. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice quiet but amplified by the microphone to a deafening volume. Damon didn't answer. He couldn't. He was staring at the screen like a deer staring at headlights. The blood had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax statue. He knew that timestamp. He knew that message. He knew there was no spinning this. But Courtney tried. Oh, she tried. "It is fake," she screamed. Her voice cracked, high and shrill. "He photoshopped it. Look at him. He is crazy. He hacked our phones and planted that." I didn't even look at her. I looked at the camera. "Next slide," I said calmly. The screen flickered. The second message appeared. This one was from Courtney. The contact photo was a selfie of her pouting. The words were even crueler than the first. "Stay in the hospital for another month. It is so nice without you." A gasp rippled through the studio audience. I heard a woman in the front row say, "Oh my God." I heard a man boo. Courtney stopped screaming. She stared at her own words, the words she had typed with her manicured thumbs while sitting on my couch drinking my wine. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who would believe her lie. But there were no allies here. The cameramen were glaring at her. The floor director was shaking his head. "You wanted to know why, Diane," I said, turning back to the anchor. "You asked me why I gave $1 million to a waitress I had never met." I pointed at the screen. "Because that waitress gave me a pack of crackers when I was hungry," I said. "My son wouldn't even give me a ride home. That waitress cried for her sick mother. My daughter-in-law laughed about me dying so she could remodel my kitchen." I stood up. I unbuttoned my suit jacket. I let the audience see the man beneath the suit. I let them feel the anger that had been fueling me for 24 hours. "But the text messages are just the beginning," I continued. "You see, my children here claim they were searching for me all night. They claim they were heartbroken. They claim I am confused. I looked down at Courtney. She was trembling now, her hands clutching her purse, the purse she had bought with my stolen pension money. Let's see what they were really doing while I was wandering the streets in the cold, I said. I signaled the control booth. Play the video. The screen changed again. This wasn't a static image. It was video footage. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough. It was the security feed from the 9th Street diner. The audience watched in captivated horror. They saw me, the old man in the beanie, sitting in the corner booth. They saw Damon and Courtney sitting 10 feet away. They saw the cocktails. They saw the laughter. Then, they saw the incident. They watched Courtney stick her leg out. They watched the waitress trip. They watched the water spill. And then, the audio kicked in. I had paid the diner owner extra for the audio files from his new security system. "You stupid idiot!" Courtney's voice screeched from the speakers, echoing through the studio. "You ruined my red bottoms. You owe me $2,000. The audience gasped again. Then they heard Damon, my son, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had taught to ride a bike. "Lick it up," Damon's voice sneered from the screen. "If you don't have the cash, lick the shoe clean." Damon closed his eyes. He put his hands over his ears, as if he could block out the sound of his own cruelty. He curled into a ball on the studio floor, trying to make himself small, trying to disappear. But there was no disappearing. The camera zoomed in on him. The red light was relentless. I watched the video play out. I watched myself walk over to the table. I watched myself throw the $10,000 down. I watched Courtney grab the money with a greed that made her look demonic. Grandpa paid the toll. Courtney's voice laughed on the recording. What a crazy old fool. The video ended. The screen went black. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. The air in the studio was electric with rage. I looked at Diane. She looked like she was about to be sick. She took a deep breath, composing herself. "Mr. Freeman," she said, her voice shaking slightly. That was hard to watch. "It was hard to live," I replied. I turned to Courtney. She wasn't screaming anymore. The fight had gone out of her. She was kneeling on the floor, staring at the blank screen, realizing that her life as she knew it was over. The socialite, the influencer, the victim, all those roles were dead. She was now the woman who told a waitress to lick a shoe. She was the most hated woman in Chicago. "You wanted to be famous, Courtney," I said, my voice low and hard. "You always told me you wanted to be an influencer. You wanted millions of people to watch you." I gestured to the cameras. "Well, look around. You got your wish. Millions of people are watching you right now. They are seeing the real you. No filters, no edits, just the ugly, naked truth." Courtney looked up at me. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. Her lips quivered. "Dad," she whispered, "please, turn it off. Please make them stop looking at me." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. "I can't turn it off, Courtney," I said. "This is live. This is reality. You can't delete this post." I looked at Damon. He was still huddled on the floor. "Damon," I said sharply. He looked up. His eyes were red, filled with tears. "You asked me why I didn't tell you about the money," I said. "You asked me why I hid $50 million from you." I pointed at the screen where the video had just played. "That is why," I said. "Because I was afraid that money would turn you into exactly what I just saw on that screen. I was afraid it would make you cruel. I was afraid it would make you weak. And I was right. Without the money, you were lazy. But with the money, you became a monster." Damon sobbed. "Dad, I am sorry. I didn't mean it. I was drunk. She made me do it." I shook my head. "A man chooses his own actions, Damon," I said. "She didn't make you say those things to that girl. She didn't make you ignore my text. You did that. You chose the game over your father. You chose the laugh over your conscience." I turned back to Diane. "I gave that $1 million to Lila Jenkins because she has something my children will never have," I told the audience. "She has humanity. She has grit. She has a soul that hasn't been rotted by entitlement. That money is an investment in a good person. And as for my son and his wife," I looked down at them one last time. "They have their inheritance," I said. "They have $10,000 in cash that they took from a homeless man in a diner. I hope they spend it wisely, because it is the last dime they will ever see from Augustus Freeman. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at the camera. "Cut the feed, Diane," I said. "The interview is over." But the feed didn't cut. The producer kept rolling. He knew this was the moment of the year. Courtney scrambled to her feet. She realized the cameras were still on. She tried to salvage it. She tried to pivot. "It is a lie," she screamed, pointing at me. "He is senile. He doctored the tapes. He is abusing us." "Security!" I barked. Two large men in black uniforms stepped out from the shadows. They had been waiting in the wings, just like I planned. "Remove these trespassers from the stage," I ordered. The guards moved in. One grabbed Damon by the arm. The other grabbed Courtney. "Get your hands off me," Courtney shrieked, kicking and flailing. "Do you know who I am? I am a Freeman." "Not anymore," I shouted over her screams. The guards dragged them away. Damon didn't fight. He hung his head, letting himself be hauled off like a sack of garbage. But Courtney fought all the way to the exit door, screaming curses, screaming threats, screaming until the heavy soundproof door slammed shut behind her. The silence returned to the studio. I stood there, smoothing my suit. My heart was beating fast, but it was a strong, steady rhythm. The pain was gone. The ghost was gone. I sat back down in the chair. I picked up my water mug. Diane stared at me. The audience stared at me. I took a sip. "So, Diane," I said calmly, "you were asking about my future plans for the logistics company." Diane blinked. She shook her head, as if waking from a dream. "Yes," she stammered. "Yes, Mr. Freeman." And just like that, the segment continued. But the world had changed. My son was broken. His wife was exposed. And I was finally, truly, awake. The silence in the television studio was not the peaceful silence of a library. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a courtroom, right after a guilty verdict has been read. The giant screen behind me was still frozen on the image of the text message. "Stay in the hospital for another month. It is so nice without you." The words hung there, glowing in high-definition pixels, branding my daughter-in-law as a monster to millions of viewers. Courtney was standing in the center of the stage, her chest heaving. The red light of the camera was a laser pointer aimed directly at her soul, and she could feel the heat of it. She looked at the audience. She looked at the cameramen. She looked at Diane, the anchor, whose face was twisted in a mask of pure revulsion. Courtney realized in that terrifying second that her mask had slipped. The carefully curated image of the sweet, supportive wife was gone. But Courtney was a fighter. She was a narcissist who had survived on lies for 26 years, and she wasn't going to go down without scratching and clawing. She wiped the black mascara tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. She straightened her spine. She pointed a shaking finger at the screen, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. "It is a lie," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "That is not my message. That is not my phone. My account was hacked." She spun around to face the camera, addressing the audience directly. "Do you hear me? I was hacked. It was a bot, a virus. I have been having trouble with my iCloud for weeks. I never wrote that. I love my father-in-law. I would never say something so cruel. This is a setup. Gus is senile, and someone is manipulating him to make us look bad." She looked at me, her eyes pleading and threatening at the same time. "Dad, tell them," she begged. "Tell them about the hackers. Tell them I am a good person." I sat there in my leather chair, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I watched her performance. It was impressive, in a grotesque sort of way. She was lying with such conviction that for a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in Diane's eyes. Maybe it was a hack. Maybe the old man was confused. I didn't get angry. I didn't shout. I simply reached for the remote control on the table next to my water mug. "A hack," I repeated slowly. My voice was deep and steady, a stark contrast to her shrill hysteria. "So you were telling the world that a computer virus broke into your phone, typed out a specific message about me dying, and sent it at the exact moment I was asking for a ride home." "Yes," Courtney yelled. "Exactly. It happens all the time. Identity theft. Cybercrime. I am a victim here." I nodded slowly. I tapped the remote against my knee. "That is a fascinating theory, Courtney," I said. And if we only had the text messages, maybe, just maybe, someone foolish enough might believe you. I leaned forward. The lights caught the reflection in my eyes. But technology is a funny thing, I continued. It is everywhere. It is in our pockets. It is on the street corners. And it is inside the 9th Street Diner on the South Side. Courtney froze. The color that had returned to her cheeks during her rant drained away instantly. She knew that name. She knew that place. "What?" she whispered. I looked at the producer in the booth. I gave him the signal. "We have one more clip, Diane," I said to the anchor. "Let's see if the hackers managed to edit reality itself." I pressed the button on the remote. The giant screen behind us flickered. The image of the text message vanished. In its place, a grainy black and white video feed appeared. The timestamp in the corner read, "Yesterday, 7:42 p.m." The audio crackled through the studio speakers. It was loud. It was raw. The video showed a booth in a diner. It showed Damon and Courtney sitting there, cocktails in hand. It showed a young waitress, Lila, tripping and spilling a glass of water. And then, the voice. Courtney's voice, crystal clear. "You stupid idiot." The scream on the video echoed through the silent studio. On stage, the real Courtney flinched as if she had been slapped. The video continued. We watched Courtney on the screen kick the waitress. We watched her slap the girl across the face. "You ruined my red bottoms. You owe me $2,000. The audience in the studio gasped, a collective sound of shock and disgust. This wasn't a text message. This wasn't a glitch. This was physical assault. This was undeniable proof of her character. But the video didn't stop there. It showed Damon, my son, leaning back in the booth, looking at the crying girl on the floor. "If you don't have the cash, lick the shoe clean." Damon, who was still kneeling on the floor of the stage, let out a moan. He covered his ears. He curled into a ball, trying to hide from his own voice. "Lick it up," the recording sneered. I watched the video play out. I watched myself, the mysterious stranger in the beanie, walk up and throw the money on the table. I watched Courtney grab the cash with a greed that made her look feral. Grandpa paid the toll. The video Courtney laughed. What a crazy old fool. The video ended. The screen went black. For 5 seconds, nobody breathed. The air in the room was thick with tension. It was the feeling of a guillotine blade dropping. I looked at Courtney. She wasn't screaming about hackers anymore. She was standing there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. There was no defense for this. There was no lie big enough to cover the ugliness that millions of people had just witnessed. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood tall. I walked over to where she was standing. "Was that a hack, Courtney?" I asked softly. "Was that a robot kicking that girl? Was that a virus stealing $10,000 from a homeless man?" She looked at me. Her eyes were empty holes of panic. "Dad," she whispered. "Don't call me Dad," I said. My voice was cold as the Chicago wind. "You lost the right to use that word when you told a human being to lick your shoe." I turned to the camera. "You see, America," I said, "this is the truth. This is why I gave my money away. Because I would rather give my fortune to a stranger who has kindness in her heart than to a family that has rot in their souls." The audience erupted. It started with one person clapping, then another, and suddenly the entire studio was on its feet. They weren't clapping for the drama. They were clapping for justice. They were cheering for the old man who had finally stood up. Courtney looked around at the applauding crowd. She looked at the cameras. She realized she was being destroyed in real time. "Stop it," she screamed, covering her ears. "Stop clapping. You don't know me. I am a victim." She lunged at me. She actually lunged. Her hands clawed out, reaching for my face, reaching for the man who had ruined her life. "You old bastard," she shrieked. "I will kill you." But she never reached me. "Security!" Diane shouted. 2 large men in black uniforms, who had been waiting in the shadows, stepped forward. They moved with the efficiency of bouncers who had seen it all. One of them grabbed Courtney by the arm. The other grabbed Damon by the collar of his jacket. "Get off me!" Courtney yelled, kicking and spitting. "Do you know who I am? I am Courtney Freeman. I am an influencer." "Not anymore," the guard grunted, dragging her toward the exit. Damon didn't fight. He went limp. He looked at me one last time as they dragged him away. His eyes were filled with tears, but also with a strange realization. He looked at me, and then he looked at his wife screaming like a banshee, and for the first time, I think he saw the truth. I watched them go. I watched my son and his wife being hauled out of the studio like common criminals. I heard Courtney's screams fading down the hallway. "I will sue you! This isn't over!" But it was over. The studio was quiet again, save for the murmurs of the audience. Diane, the anchor, looked at me. She looked shaken. "Mr. Freeman," she said, I don't know what to say. I am so sorry you had to go through that." I buttoned my suit jacket. I adjusted my tie. I looked into the camera lens, knowing that millions of people were watching. I knew that somewhere out there, Lila the waitress was watching. I knew that my old employees were watching. "Don't be sorry, Diane," I said. I took a step closer to the camera. "I want everyone watching this to understand one thing. I spent 40 years building a business. I thought that leaving my son a fortune was the greatest gift I could give him. I was wrong." I paused. "Money is not a gift," I said. "Money is a tool. In the hands of a builder, it creates. In the hands of a fool, it destroys. My son and his wife, they are drowning in their own greed, and I refuse to be the lifeguard who goes down with them." I looked straight into the lens, my eyes hard and clear. To any parent out there who is afraid to say no to their children, to any parent who thinks buying love works, look at me. Look at what happened here today. I took a deep breath. I would rather die alone with my dignity than live in a mansion surrounded by vultures. I would rather give my last dime to a stranger who smiles at me than feed a family that waits for me to die. I turned to Diane. "Thank you for having me," I said. I turned and walked off the set. I walked past the cameras. I walked past the cheering audience. I walked toward the exit door where the cold winter air was waiting. I was alone again. I had no wife. I had no son. I had no daughter-in-law. But as I stepped out into the Chicago night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy coat of lies I had been wearing was gone. I was Augustus Freeman, and for the first time in a long time, I liked the man I saw in the reflection of the glass door. The aftermath of the broadcast was a digital wildfire that no one could extinguish. By the time I stepped into the back of my private car, the video clips of the interview had already racked up 5 million views. The internet is a hungry beast, and that morning, it decided to feast on Courtney. She had spent years trying to be famous, trying to be the center of attention, and now she finally was. But it wasn't the kind of fame she could monetize. It was the kind of infamy that erases you. I sat in the back seat, watching the notifications on my phone. The hashtag Courtney Freeman was trending #1. People weren't just angry, they were disgusted. The girl who prided herself on being a high-end influencer was watching her world burn in real time. One by one, the brands she worked with began to post public statements. A luxury skincare line announced they were terminating her contract immediately, citing a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. A designer shoe brand, the very one she had been wearing at the diner, released a statement saying they were horrified by her behavior and would be donating $50,000 to the waitress's charity of choice. She was losing her digital empire, follower by follower, until there was nothing left but a wall of hate. But for Damon, the fallout was more personal. He had always been the golden boy in our community, the son of the great Gus Freeman. He walked through the world with a sense of untouchable confidence because of my name. But that name was now a shield that had been turned into a sword. I heard through Bernie that Damon's friends, the ones he bought drinks for and took on trips, had blocked his number. They didn't want to be associated with a man who would leave his father in the snow for a football game. In the span of a single morning, my son had gone from a socialite to a pariah. I felt a twinge of sadness, but I pushed it down. This was the natural law of the world. You reap what you sow, and Damon had been planting seeds of neglect for far too long. The financial blow was the next layer of the collapse. When they finally managed to get to a computer to check their accounts, they found a wasteland. I didn't just stop the monthly transfers. I had Bernie file a formal civil lawsuit. We were suing Courtney for the unauthorized use of my pension funds. That $5,000 she had used to buy a handbag wasn't just a family dispute. It was credit card fraud. It was a felony. They thought the $10,000 I threw on the table at the diner would save them. They thought they could use it to start over. But they didn't realize that I had already alerted the bank to flag those specific bills if they were deposited. They were effectively holding stolen property. They had no house, no credit, no friends, and now They were staring down the barrel of a criminal investigation. I was sitting in my study, the fireplace crackling, when Bernie called with the final update of the day. "Gus," he said, his voice sounding tired but satisfied. "It is happening. The police just arrived at the motel where they were hiding." I leaned back, closing my eyes. "Tell me," I whispered. "Lila Jenkins filed a formal complaint for assault and battery this morning," Bernie explained. "Between the video evidence from the diner and the live broadcast, the district attorney didn't hesitate. They issued a warrant for Courtney's arrest, and they are questioning Damon as an accessory." I didn't say a word. I just listened to the silence on the line. The arrest happened in a dingy motel on the outskirts of the city, a place with stained carpets and a smell of cigarettes, a far cry from the life of luxury they thought they deserved. I saw the footage later on the news. Courtney was being led out in handcuffs, still wearing the same fur stole, but it looked pathetic now. She was screaming, fighting the officers, her face a mask of desperation. Damon was standing by the car, his head down, his hands in his pockets, watching his wife being hauled away. He looked like he had finally realized that the game was truly over. They had nothing left. No dignity, no money, no home. They had traded a father's love for a moment of arrogance, and the market had crashed. I turned off the television and looked out at the snowy streets of Chicago. The city looked peaceful from 60 floors up. I had built an empire, and I had protected it. But more importantly, I had finally shown my son the truth. I had removed the insulation of wealth and let him feel the cold. I knew the road ahead would be long. There would be court dates and legal fees. There would be more tears and more anger. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the burden. I had handed it back to the people who created it. I walked over to the window and placed my hand on the cool glass. I was Augustus Freeman. I was a builder. And today, I had started the most difficult demolition project of my career, the demolition of a lie. I took a deep breath, feeling the steady beat of my heart. The surgeons had fixed the physical blockage, but I had fixed the spiritual one. I was 70 years old, alone in a penthouse, but I wasn't lonely. I was free. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized decades ago. "Lila," I said when she answered. "It is Gus. How is your mother doing?" She started to cry, but they were happy tears. "She is stable, Gus. The doctors say she can have the surgery tomorrow." "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did, Lila," I said. "You gave me a reason to wake up." I hung up and looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the skyscrapers. It was a beautiful evening, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The house on Elm Street was empty, the locks were changed, and the accounts were closed. The vultures had been scattered, the ghost had reclaimed his life, and as the darkness settled over the city, I realized that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters: respect, integrity, and the courage to stand alone in the wind. My son and his wife were gone, but Augustus Freeman was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. I sat in my high-back leather chair in the penthouse office, looking out at the city as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The orange glow reflected off the glass of the skyscrapers, making Chicago look like it was on fire. It was a beautiful view, but my heart was heavy. I heard the chime of the private elevator, and then the heavy footsteps of someone who didn't want to be there. Damon walked into the room. He looked terrible. He was wearing a cheap hooded sweatshirt and jeans that were stained with salt and dirt. He had lost weight. The arrogance that usually sat on his shoulders like a designer coat had been stripped away. He stood by the door, not knowing whether to sit or stay standing. He looked at the marble floors and the expensive art, and I could see the hunger in his eyes, not just for food, but for the life he had thrown away. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't turn my chair around immediately. I let the silence stretch out. I wanted him to feel the space between us. I wanted him to realize that this room, this life, was no longer his playground. I finally swiveled the chair. I looked at my son, my only son, the boy I had once dreamed would take over my empire and lead the Freeman name into the next century. Now he looked like a ghost of himself. "You look tired, Damon," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the last few weeks. "I haven't slept, Dad," he said, stepping closer. "The motel is loud. The police keep coming by to ask questions about the credit card fraud. And Courtney," he choked on her name. Courtney is falling apart in that cell. Her lawyer says the evidence from the diner and the hospital messages is a slam dunk for the prosecution. She is facing 5 years for grand larceny and elder abuse. He fell into the chair across from my desk, the chair he used to sit in when he was asking for a new car or a trip to Vegas. He leaned forward, his hands shaking. "Please, Dad," he begged. "You have to help her. You have to drop the charges. If you tell the district attorney it was just a family misunderstanding, they will let her go. You can pay back the $5,000. It is nothing to you. You are a millionaire. Please don't let her life be ruined because of one bad night." I looked at him and felt a flash of pity that was quickly replaced by a cold, hard truth. "One bad night, Damon?" I asked. "Is that what you call it? You call it a bad night when you tell your father to take a taxi after heart surgery. You call it a bad night when you tell a young woman to lick your wife's shoe because she is poor. That wasn't a bad night, son. That was a revelation of character. That was the curtain being pulled back to show me that I raised a man who has no soul." Damon flinched. He looked away. "I know I messed up, Dad. We both did. But isn't that what family is for? To forgive? To help when things get bad? Family is built on respect, Damon," I said. "And you traded respect for comfort a long time ago." I reached down and picked up a heavy canvas duffel bag from beside my desk. I threw it onto the mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy thud, making the pens in my silver holder rattle. Damon looked at the bag. "What is this?" "Money." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Open it," I said. Damon reached out his fingers, trembling. He unzipped the bag. He didn't find stacks of $100 bills. He didn't find a checkbook. He reached in and pulled out a bundle of heavy orange fabric. He held it up. It was a thick, waterproof jumpsuit with reflective silver stripes. It was stained with grease and smelled of rubber and industrial cleaner. It was the uniform of a Chicago sanitation worker. Next to it were a pair of steel-toed boots and a heavy-duty flashlight. Damon stared at the orange suit. He looked at me, confused. "I don't understand." "Here is the deal, Damon," I said, leaning forward. "I have spent my life making things easy for you. I thought I was being a good father, but I was actually being your worst enemy. I gave you the fruit, but I never showed you the roots. I never showed you the dirt." I tapped the desk. "I talked to an old friend of mine today. His name is Silas. He runs the city's deep-line sanitation crew. They go down into the sewers, Damon. They clear the blockages that the machines can't reach. It is dark, it is wet, it is filthy, and it is the hardest work in this city." Damon's jaw dropped. You want me to work in the sewers. I want you to learn what a dollar feels like when you earn it with your back," I said. "Silas is short-handed. He agreed to take you on for a 6-month contract. Starting tomorrow at 5 in the morning, you will report to the yard. You will put on that orange suit. You will go down into the mud and the filth. You will work 10-hour shifts for $20 an hour." "No way," Damon spat, pushing the bag away. "I am a marketing executive, Dad. I am a businessman. I have a degree. I am not going into a sewer to shovel trash. That is beneath me." I stood up. I didn't need the cane in that moment. I felt like the man who used to lift engine blocks with his bare hands. "Beneath you," I roared. My voice echoed off the marble walls. "You think that work is beneath you? Let me tell you something, boy. My father was a sharecropper. He worked in dirt until his fingernails fell off. I spent 20 years in the cab of a truck, peeing in a bottle and sleeping in rest stops, just so you could have that degree you are so proud of. Every dollar in your bank account was earned by a freeman standing in the dirt." I pointed a finger at him. "You think you are a businessman. A businessman knows the value of an asset, and right now your only asset is my mercy." I sat back down and lowered my voice, but the steel was still there. "If you do this, Damon, if you work every shift for 6 months, if you don't complain and you don't quit, then at the end of those 6 months, I will drop the civil lawsuit against Courtney. I will pay her legal fees, and I will help her get a plea deal that keeps her out of prison. I will give her a chance to start over." Damon looked at the bag, then back at me. "And what about me? What do I get?" "You get your soul back," I said. "You get to look in the mirror and see a man who isn't a parasite. You get to understand that the people you mocked at that diner are the ones who keep this world spinning. You get the chance to be a freeman again." Damon stared at the orange uniform. I could see the battle going on inside him. I could see the pride fighting with the fear. He thought about the motel room. He thought about the cold. He thought about his wife crying in a concrete cell, and he realized he had no other cards to play. He was a man who had bet his life on a lie, and the lie had failed. He reached out and grabbed the bag. He pulled it toward him. 5 a.m., he whispered. 5 a.m. sharp, I said. Silas doesn't like to wait. If you are a minute late, the deal is off. And don't bother calling me to complain. I am going to Florida for a few months. I need some sun for my heart. Damon stood up holding the heavy bag. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't greed. It was a tiny spark of respect. I will be there, Dad, he said. I watched him walk to the elevator. The doors closed, and I was alone in the penthouse again. I let out a long breath. It was a gamble, a desperate gamble. I didn't know if the work would save him or break him, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let him stay the way he was. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I saw him walk out of the lobby carrying the orange bag. He looked small against the backdrop of the city, but he was walking with a purpose. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I sat back down and took a deep breath. The doctor said I needed to avoid stress, but sometimes you have to burn the field to make the soil rich again. I picked up the phone and dialed Bernie. Bernie, I said. The boy took the bag. Bernie sighed on the other end. You really think he can do it, Gus? You think he can handle the sewers? I looked at the picture of my father on the desk. A man who never complained. A man who worked until the day he died. He is a freeman, Bernie, I said. We have iron in our blood. He just needs to remember where it came from. I hung up and looked at the moon rising over the lake. The ghost was gone. The father was waiting. And somewhere in the dark underbelly of Chicago, a son was about to find out what it really meant to be a man. The lesson was no longer about the money. It was about the sweat. And I hoped that by the time the snow melted, Damon would be a man I could finally call my son again. If you believe that hard work builds character more than a bank account ever could, please leave a comment below. Let me know if you think I am being too hard on him, or if this is exactly what he needs. Hit like and subscribe to see the rest of the journey. Until next time, stay strong and stay real. 6 months is a long time when you are counting every minute of a 10-hour shift in the dark. It is long enough for the seasons to shift from the bone-chilling winds of a Chicago January to the thick, heavy heat of a July afternoon. It is also long enough for a man to find out exactly what he is made of when the lights go out and the money runs dry. I spent those 6 months in Florida, letting the sun warm my old bones and listening to the steady thrum of my heart, which was beating stronger than it had in years. But I never stopped watching. I never stopped listening. Bernie sent me reports every week, not just on the business, but on the boy. Silas called me once a month, too. He didn't say much, because Silas is a man of few words, but he told me what I needed to know. Your boy is still showing up, Gus. That was all I needed to hear. While I was resting, Courtney was busy rotting. The legal system in Chicago does not move fast, but it moves surely, especially when a billionaire is the one pressing charges. Between the video from the diner and the digital trail of her hacking my accounts, she didn't have a leg to stand on. She spent 4 months in the county jail awaiting trial, because nobody was there to pay her bail. Not her father, who was sitting in a federal cell in Florida, and certainly not me. I heard through the grapevine that she hated every second of it. She hated the orange polyester. She hated the food. She hated the fact that no one cared who she was or how many followers she used to have. 3 months into her stay, the divorce papers arrived at my office. She didn't send them because she was sorry. She sent them because she realized the well was truly dry. She realized that Damon was no longer her ticket to a penthouse, and she wasn't going to waste another minute on a man who was shoveling trash in a sewer. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, which I suppose is a fancy legal way of saying he ran out of money. I sent the papers down to the sanitation yard. Bernie told me that Damon didn't even hesitate. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for her to stay. He sat on a plastic crate in the locker room, still covered in the grime of the city, and signed his name in bold, steady strokes. He told Bernie to tell her she was welcome to keep whatever was left in her closet, because he didn't want anything that reminded him of the lie they lived. That was the first sign that the boy was dying, and the man was being born. When I finally flew back to Chicago, the heat was rising off the asphalt in shimmering waves. I didn't go to the penthouse first. I didn't go to the office. I told my driver to take me to the intersection of State and Lake. I had checked the work schedule. Damon's crew was doing a deep line inspection in the main artery of the South Loop. I stepped out of the car, and the city noise hit me like a symphony. I walked toward the orange barriers and the heavy equipment idling by the curb. I saw Silas standing there holding a clipboard, his face like a piece of weathered leather under a hard hat. He saw me and gave a short nod. "He is down there," Silas said, pointing to the open manhole. "They are clearing a grease blockage near the subway line. It is a nasty one." I looked at the dark hole in the ground. I felt a pang in my chest, but I pushed it down. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I put on a safety vest and a hard hat that Silas handed me. I climbed down the iron rungs slowly, my old knees complaining with every step. The air changed as I descended. It got cooler, but it also got thicker. It smelled of old water, cold stone, and the heavy metallic scent of the city's veins. I reached the bottom of the ladder and stood on the narrow concrete walkway. About 20 yards down the tunnel, I saw the glow of industrial flashlights. 3 men in orange jumpsuits were working near a massive pipe. They were using high-pressure hoses and long steel poles to break apart a mountain of debris. I stayed in the shadows and watched. I saw the man in the center. He was thinner than he used to be. The soft weight of luxury had melted off his frame, leaving behind a lean, hard-looking man with broad shoulders. His skin was darker, tan from the few hours he spent above ground, and stained with the gray soot of the tunnels. His hair was cut short, buzz cut style for utility. He was swinging a heavy iron bar with a rhythmic power that made me think of my own father. He wasn't complaining. He wasn't looking at his watch. He was focused on the work. After a few minutes, the foreman called for a break. The men leaned their tools against the wall and sat down on the walkway. They were covered in sweat and grime. Damon pulled off his heavy rubber gloves and reached into a small cooler. He pulled out a sandwich wrapped in plain brown paper. He unwrapped it and took a bite. It was just a dry turkey sandwich. No fancy condiments, no artisanal bread, just fuel. I stepped out of the shadows. The sound of my shoes on the concrete made him look up. Damon froze. He stared at me for a long time, his sandwich halfway to his mouth. For a second I saw the old Damon, the boy who would have been embarrassed to be seen like this. I expected him to hide the sandwich or wipe the dirt off his face. But he didn't. He slowly put the sandwich back in the wrapper. He stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He stood tall in that stained orange jumpsuit and looked me right in the eye. "Hello, Dad," he said. His voice was different. It was deeper. It was steady. The whine was gone. The hesitation was gone. I walked up to him, stopping just a few feet away. I smelled the sewer on him, but I didn't flinch. I looked at his hands. They were raw and calloused. There were small cuts and bruises on his knuckles. These were the hands of a freeman. "You missed a spot on your chin," I said. Damon laughed. It wasn't the bitter, crazy laugh from the car. It was a short, honest sound. He wiped his face with a greasy sleeve. "I am sure I missed more than a few spots, Dad," he said. I looked at the sandwich. "Silas tells me you haven't missed a day," I said. "He tells me you are the first one in the yard, and the last one out of the hole." "I don't have anywhere else to be," Damon said. "And the work, it is honest. It doesn't lie to you. You either clear the pipe or you don't. You either earn the $20 or you don't. It is simpler this way." I looked at him and I saw it. The thing I had been searching for since he was a toddler. The spark. His eyes weren't glassy or tired anymore. They were bright. They were alive. He looked like a man who knew exactly where he stood in the world. He looked like a man who didn't need a $50 million bank account to feel important. "Bernie told me about the papers," I said softly. Damon nodded. He looked at the dark water flowing past us. "She only loved the ghost dad," he said. "She didn't want the man in the orange suit. And honestly, I am glad she is gone. I spent 3 years trying to fill a hole in her heart with your money, and all I did was lose my own soul in the process. I see things clearly now. I see what she was, and I see what I was." He looked back at me. "I am sorry, Dad," he said. "I am sorry for every time I made you feel like you were a burden. I am sorry for forgetting that you built everything I was wasting. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am going to keep working until I feel like I have earned the right to sit at your table again." I felt a tear welling up in my eye. I didn't hide it. I reached out and put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't care about the grease. I didn't care about the smell. I felt the muscle underneath the orange fabric. I felt the strength. "You already earned it, son," I whispered. Damon shook his head. "No, not yet. I have 3 months left on my contract. I am going to finish it. I am going to finish what I started. I need to know that I can do it without a safety net." I nodded. I understood. He didn't want a handout. He wanted a victory. I sat down on the crate next to him. I took off my expensive suit jacket and laid it on the dirty concrete. "Do you have another one of those sandwiches?" I asked. "I am starving." Damon smiled and reached into his cooler. He handed me a wrapped sandwich. We sat there in the dark underbelly of Chicago, a billionaire and a sewer worker eating dry turkey and listening to the city hum above our heads. I realized then that my $50 million was nothing compared to this moment. The money was just paper. This was the empire. My son was back. And this time, he wasn't made of glass. He was made of steel. "You are going to be a hell of a boss one day, Damon," I said. Damon took a bite of his sandwich and looked down the long, dark tunnel. "Maybe," he said, "but for now I am just a hell of a pipe crawler, and that is enough for me." We sat in silence for a while. The work bell rang, signaling the end of the break. Damon stood up and put on his gloves. He picked up the heavy iron bar. He looked at me one last time before turning back to the muck. "See you at 5, Dad," he said. I watched him walk back to the pipe. I watched him swing that bar. I climbed back up the ladder toward the light. As I reached the surface and felt the Chicago sun on my face, I took a deep breath. My heart was beating perfectly. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. If you believe that the greatest gift a father can give a son is not a fortune, but the opportunity to find his own strength, please let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories of transformation. Hit like and subscribe to see how Damon finishes his journey and how we rebuild the Freeman legacy together. I will see you in the next part. Stay strong and stay grounded. I parked my old Ford across the street from the 9th Street Diner. The neon sign was still flickering, buzzing like a persistent memory, but the letters had been fixed. It felt different tonight. The air was warm, a typical Chicago summer evening, where the humidity clings to your skin, but the breeze from the lake brings a bit of relief. I sat in the truck for a moment, feeling the steady beat of my heart. The doctors told me I was a miracle, but I knew the real miracle was about to happen inside that greasy spoon. I walked in, and the smell of onions and coffee hit me. It was the smell of my beginning. Lila was behind the counter. She looked radiant. She had used part of that $1 million to renovate the place and pay for her mother's surgery, but she still worked the night shift. She saw me, and her whole face lit up. She didn't say anything, just gave me a small nod and pointed to the back booth. The same booth where I had sat in the shadows 6 months ago, watching my life fall apart. Damon was already there. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and work pants. His hair was short, and his hands were resting on the table. They weren't soft anymore. They were the hands of a man who knew how to use a wrench and a shovel. When he saw me, he stood up. He didn't wait for me to reach him. He met me halfway. "Hey, Dad," he said. He didn't hug me. We weren't there yet. But he pulled out my chair, a simple gesture of respect that felt bigger than $1 million check. I sat down and looked at him. "You look good, son," I said. "I feel good," he replied. "Tired, but good. Silas said the contract is up tomorrow. He offered me a foreman position." I smiled. "That is a big deal, Damon. Silas doesn't hand those out to just anyone." "I know," he said, "but I told him I had other plans." We ordered. No seafood towers. No vintage wine. Just high orders of steak and eggs and 2 mugs of black coffee. We ate in silence for a while. The kind of comfortable silence that only comes when there is nothing left to hide. The shame that used to hang between us had been washed away by months of sweat and grime. "Damon," I said, setting my fork down. "I watched you, ning Munsnay. I saw you sign young papers Lee Hone without a word. I saw you go down into those sewers when you could have walked away. You proved to me that you are a Freeman." Damon looked at the coffee. "I just wanted to prove it to myself, Dad. I realized that Courtney didn't ruin me. I ruined myself. I let the money be my only identity. Without it, I was a hollow shell. I don't ever want to be that man again." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a single key. It wasn't a sleek electronic fob for a luxury car. It was an old-fashioned, heavy brass key on a leather ring. I slid it across the table. Damon looked at it. What is this? The penthouse. I shook my head. No. That penthouse is staying empty until I decide what to do with it. This key is for a warehouse in Cicero. Inside that warehouse is a 1998 Peterbilt truck. It is the first truck I ever owned. I spent the last BA months having the engine rebuilt and the body repainted. It is as good as new. Damon picked up the key. He ran his thumb over the brass. I am not giving you the 50 million, Damon, I said. Not now. Maybe not for a long time. That money is sitting in a trust for your future children. But I am giving you a start. That truck la con. I have a contract waiting for you with a local distributor. It is hard work. Long hours on the road. You will have to find your own drivers. You will have to do your own books. You will have to build your own empire from that one single cab. Damon stared at the key. I saw his eyes start to shimmer. I saw a single tear track through the dust on his cheek. It won't be easy, I continued. People will know you are my son. They will expect you to fail. They will wait for you to come crawling back for a handout. But if you work that truck the way I worked it, you will never have to answer to anyone. You will know that every cent in your pocket belongs to you. Not to me, not to a ghost, to you. Damon gripped the key so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't look at the money he didn't have. He looked at the opportunity he did have. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 30 years I saw my own reflection in his eyes. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. His voice was thick with emotion. "This is better than the millions. This is mine." He didn't just cry, he wept. It was a quiet, manly release of all the tension, all the regret, and all the fear he had been carrying. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. My heart, which had been broken by a text message and repaired by a surgeon, finally felt whole. It was healed not by medicine, but by the sight of my son standing on his own 2 feet. We walked out of the diner together. The city was glowing. The streetlights were bright, and the world felt wide open. "I will see you at the yard tomorrow morning, son," I said as he walked to his old beat-up car. "I will be there, Dad," he promised. I climbed into my truck and looked at the tackle box on the passenger seat. My phone was inside, buried under some fishing lures. It started to vibrate, an unknown number. I didn't even look at the screen. I didn't care who it was. The lawyers, the press, the vultures, they couldn't touch me anymore. I picked up the phone, and without a second thought, I tossed it out the window into a trash bin by the curb. I didn't need it. I had everything I needed right here. I threw the truck into gear and drove toward the lake. The ghost was officially gone. Augustus Freeman was home. And for the first time in my life, I knew that the Freeman legacy wasn't built on steel and diesel. It was built on the strength of a man who knows when to say no, so that his son can finally learn how to say, "I can." True inheritance is not found in a bank account or a deed, but in the grit found within a person's soul. We often think that loving Quechunta children means removing every obstacle, but in doing so, we leave them defenseless against the world's storms. A father's duty is not just to provide, but to provoke growth through challenge. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge of dependency to force them to build their own way across. When you stop being their crutch, they finally discover they have wings. Character is the only wealth that can never be stolen. If you found strength in this story of a father's tough love and a son's redemption, please leave a comment below. I want to hear about the lessons you have learned from your parents or the boundaries you have set for your own children. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our family of builders. Your support helps us tell more stories about what it truly means to be a man of integrity. Thank you for watching, and remember to keep your heart strong and your values stronger.